The wedding ring hit the dining table with a sound so small it shouldn't have meant anything. But Adrian Voss heard it like a gunshot. 3 years. 3 years of locked doors, disappearing at midnight, coming home with bruised knuckles and no explanation. 3 years of Elena Marlowe telling herself that loving a dangerous man meant accepting the silence. She had believed that. She had made peace with it. Until tonight when she found the file, the one hidden behind the false panel in his study. The one containing dates, payments, names, and the devastating proof that the debt which destroyed her parents, the threat that made their marriage feel necessary, the rescue she had been grateful for every single day. None of it was coincidence. All of it was Adrian. She had not been rescued. She had been chosen. If you've ever loved someone who made you question everything you thought was real, stiff this story. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments below so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about love, power, and the price of a secret kept too long. The file was still in her hands when Elena walked out of Adrian's study and into the main hallway of the house she had never quite learned to call home. It was a beautiful house. That had never been the problem. 4,200 square feet of steel and glass and imported stone, sitting behind a private gate on the north edge of Lincoln Park, the kind of address that made taxi drivers go quiet and doormen stand a little straighter. Elena had moved into it 3 years ago with 2 suitcases, a box of her mother's recipe cards, and the quiet, desperate relief of a woman who believed she had just been saved from drowning. She set the file on the dining room table without looking at it again. She already knew what was in it. She'd read it 3 times in the study, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, because her legs had stopped working somewhere around page 4. The wedding ring came off her finger slowly. It had never sat quite right, a half size too large, something Adrian had promised to fix and then never did. She had worn it anyway, careful about how she moved her hand so it wouldn't slip. 3 years of being careful about that one small thing, while enormous things moved around her without her knowledge. She placed the ring on the table beside the file. Then she sat down in one of the dining chairs, the ones she had picked out herself, because Adrian hadn't cared. He never cared about things like chairs and curtain colors, and whether the kitchen got morning light, and she waited. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. She just knew she wasn't leaving yet. Not because she was afraid to, but because she had something to say, and she intended to say it to his face. Adrian came home at 11:17. She heard his car in the drive, heard the front door code being entered, heard the particular way he moved through a room, not loud, never loud, but deliberate. Every step measured, every movement controlled. She had once found that quality magnetic, the stillness of a man who never seemed surprised by anything. Tonight it made her stomach hurt. He came into the dining room and stopped. He saw the ring first, then the file, then her. Elena watched his face and saw nothing change in it. That was the thing about Adrian Voss that people who didn't know him always misread. They thought his stillness meant he wasn't feeling anything. What it actually meant was that he had spent so many years deciding exactly what to show and what to contain that the machinery had become invisible even to him. But Elena knew his face. She had studied it in the dark, in unguarded moments, in the seconds between sleeping and waking, when the control slipped just enough. She knew what nothing looked like on his face, and this wasn't nothing. This was a man who had just seen something he had spent years hoping never to happen. "You found it," he said. "Not a question." Elena nodded. "Behind the panel in your study. The one you told me was a structural support column." She paused. "It's not a structural support column." "No, how long?" she asked. "How long has that file existed?" Adrian walked to the far side of the table. He didn't sit. He put both hands flat on the surface, a gesture she recognized. He did it in meetings when he wanted to ground himself, to feel the physical weight of something solid beneath his palms. The earliest documents in there are from 6 years ago. 6 years, 3 before they even met. Elena absorbed that. She had already known it, she'd read the dates, but hearing him say it out loud in his flat, careful voice made it real in a different way. "You engineered my father's debt?" Adrian said nothing. "That's not a complicated question," Elena said. "You engineered my father's debt. The company that called in his loans, it was a shell company. One of yours. I found the incorporation documents." "Yes." The word landed quietly between them. "And the business failure." Elena kept her voice level. She had made a decision in the study, sitting on the floor, that she would not cry in front of him. Not because tears were weakness, but because she wanted him to hear every word she said clearly. without the distraction of her falling apart. The deal that collapsed and wiped out everything he'd spent 20 years building. You arranged that? I didn't arrange it. Adrian stopped, seemed to consider something. I made certain it would fail at a specific time. Different? He didn't answer. And the threat? Elena continued. The one that supposedly made our marriage necessary for my family's safety. The one your people told my father about. The criminal organization that had supposedly marked him for something because of his business connections. She looked at Adrian directly. That threat came from your organization. You created it. The silence in the room was the specific kind that comes when someone has run out of ways to deny something true. Adrian straightened. He didn't look away from her. Whatever else he was, Elena had always known that he wasn't a coward, at least not in the conventional sense. He would look at things directly. He just rarely explained them. You were never in danger from me, he said. Your family was never in actual danger. We were in danger you manufactured, Elena said, which you then positioned yourself to resolve, which made you look like a solution to a problem you had secretly created. She heard her own voice get quieter. Adrian, what is wrong with you? Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Something older and harder than guilt. Don't. She held up one hand. Don't tell me what you needed. Tell me what you thought you were doing. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, lower. Stripped of the particular tone he used in professional contexts, the one that always sounded like he was addressing a board meeting. I saw you at your father's gallery opening 4 years ago, before any of this. You were arguing with the caterer about something, I don't remember what, and you were completely right, and you knew it, and you were still polite to him. A pause. I didn't know how to get near you any other way. Elena stared at him. So you destroyed my family's finances, she said slowly, because you didn't know how to ask me on a date. Is that what happened? The muscle in his jaw tightened. It's more complicated than that. Then explain the complication. Because from where I'm sitting, the explanation is that you decided you wanted something, and you didn't consider whether I had any say in wanting it back. She stood up. You took away my choices, Adrian. Every single one of them. The choice to stay with my father and help him rebuild. Choice to build a career on my own terms. The choice to marry someone I loved who loved me back. You took all of it away, and then you handed me a controlled version of my own life and watched me be grateful for it. Adrian did not move. Did you love me? Elena asked. At any point in the last 3 years. Not protecting me, not managing me, not making sure I was safe in a world you secretly controlled. Did you love me? He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. Elena picked up her wedding ring from the table. She looked at it for a moment, the half size too large, the way it had always slid toward the wrong knuckle if she wasn't paying attention. Then she set it back down. You never loved me, she said. Adrian's mouth opened slightly, closed again. You don't have to agree, Elena told him. I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying it, so that at least one true thing gets said in this room tonight. She walked to the hallway closet, took out the coat she kept there, and put it on. I'm leaving now. I'm going to stay with a friend. Tomorrow I'll arrange to have my things collected. Elena. She stopped but didn't turn around. Where will you go? His voice had shifted again, and this was the voice she had heard, only rarely. The one that had no professional distance in it. The one that sounded like a person rather than a position. Not to your father's. Why not? Because there are people who know you're connected to me. People who would use you to get to me. She turned around then. Are you seriously trying to scare me into staying? No, he said it with an exhaustion she hadn't expected. I'm telling you, because you need to know it. Whether you stay or go, you need to know it. He crossed the rooms slowly and stopped at a distance she could have crossed in 2 steps. There are people, one in particular, a man named Marcus Vale, who have been trying to find leverage against me for 2 years. You are leverage. You've always been leverage, whether you knew it or not. Something crossed his face that she had no word for. You were safer while you were here safer, Elena repeated. In the house built on a lie. Yes, you understand, she said carefully, that you saying that is not a reason for me to stay. It's another reason for me to leave. Because I would rather handle whatever comes next myself than spend one more night in a life I didn't actually agree to. She walked out. The cold hit her on the front step, sharp and clarifying. It was October, and Chicago at night in October was its own particular character wind off the lake, leaves moving fast down empty streets. The city lit up in the distance like it was trying to compete with the dark. Elena stood on the step for a moment, breathing it in, and felt something she hadn't expected. not relief exactly. Not grief either. Something in between. Something that felt like arriving at a place after a long trip, during which you'd questioned whether the place was even real. She started walking. She didn't look back at the house. She had meant it when she said it. She had needed to say it. And the fact that he hadn't denied it, hadn't argued, hadn't tried to reframe what he'd done into something more forgivable, that was the only honest thing that had passed between them in 3 years, and she was going to hold on to it as she walked. You never loved me. He had not said she was wrong. Her friend Dara lived 20 minutes by cab in Wicker Park, above a vintage clothing shop that Dara owned and operated with the energy of someone who had been given double the normal allowance of personality. Elena had known Dara since they were both 18, had been her maid of honor at a wedding that didn't last, had held her hand in a hospital waiting room twice. Dara was the kind of person who did not ask a lot of questions when you showed up at her door at 11:45 at night with red eyes and no luggage. She opened the door, took one look at Elena, and said, "Come in. I'm making tea and you're going to drink it, and then you can talk or not talk. I don't care either way." Anna sat at Dara's kitchen table, while Dara moved around the small space making tea with the focused efficiency of someone who needed something to do. The apartment was warm and slightly cluttered, and smelled like cedar and old fabric. Elena looked at her own hands on the table. She'd forgotten she wasn't wearing her ring, and then remembered why. "It's Adrian," Dara said. "Not a question. It's Adrian." Dara set a mug in front of her and sat down across the table. She waited. Elena told her everything. Not all the legal details, not the shell companies and the corporate structures. She'd only half understood but the shape of it. The deliberate manufacturing of her family's crisis. The engineered dependency. The 3 years of a marriage built on a foundation that had been carefully laid without her knowledge or consent. She talked for almost an hour without stopping, and Dara didn't interrupt her once, which was possibly the greatest act of friendship Elena had ever experienced. When she finished, Dara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to happen now?" "I want to reopen the bakery." Dara blinked. "Your mother's place on the south side? Been closed for 2 years. The space is still leased. Adrian's been paying the lease." Elena felt something tighten in her throat, which I didn't know, obviously, because that's the theme of my life apparently. But the equipment is still there. The walk-in still works. I checked the business registration last week. I don't even know why. I just wanted to look at my mother's name on something official. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I want to reopen it. I want something that belongs to me." "Then do it," Dara said simply. "It's not simple." "No, but the decision is." Dara studied her. "You're not asking me what to do. You already know what to do. You're asking me if it's crazy." "Is it?" "Elena, you married a man who runs the Chicago underworld through 17 shell corporations. Simple left the station a while ago." Dara reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. "Open the bakery. I'll help you. I have a van." Elena almost laughed. It was the closest she'd come to laughing in hours, and it surprised her, the way small kindnesses always surprised her when she'd been in the middle of something hard. She slept in Dara's spare room that night, in a bed with a quilt that didn't match anything else in the room, and a pillow that was slightly too flat, and she was unconscious before midnight and slept without dreaming for the first time in longer than she could remember. She did not call Adrian the next morning. She called her father. Martin Marlowe had aged a specific amount in the last 4 years, not just physically, though that was there too, the gray that had come in fast after the business collapse, the way he moved a little more carefully than he used to. He'd aged in the particular way that men age when they've experienced something that knocked them off their internal foundation, and they're still, quietly, working out how to stand on the new ground. Elena had always attributed it to the business failure and the debts and the shame of needing help from Adrian's circle. She understood it differently now. She called him from Dara's kitchen at 7 in the morning, and he answered on the second ring because he always had, his whole life, answered calls quickly. It was the habit of a man who'd spent decades in business and never quite unlearned the belief that an answered call was an opportunity lost. Elena. His voice was warm and careful in the particular way it always got when he was trying to gauge how she was before committing to a tone. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through all of it before you respond." A short pause. Okay, she got through most of it. She started with leaving the house and worked backward carefully, not wanting to put too much on him at once, feeling her way through the information like someone navigating in limited light. She told him about the file, the documents, the shell company. She told him about the engineered debt. He was silent for a very long time after she stopped talking. Dad, I'm here. His voice had changed completely. Gone flat and quiet. Elena, I have to tell you something. She gripped the phone a little tighter. What? I knew, he said. Not all of it. But I knew more than I told you. He sounded exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the early hour. After the business collapsed, when Adrian's people first approached me about the arrangement, about you, I had questions. I hired someone quietly to look into things. Elena's stomach dropped. Dad, I found some of it. Not everything you found, but enough. Enough to understand that the timing of the collapse was not natural. His voice shook once and steadied. I made a decision, Elena. A terrible one. I decided that what you were being offered, security, protection, a life with someone who clearly intended to keep you safe, was better than the truth. He stopped. I told myself you would be all right, that you would build something there, that it was better not to know. You knew, Elena said carefully, that my marriage was built on manipulation, and you let me walk into it. Because you thought it was safer. Because I was terrified, her father said, and his voice broke on the last word, cleanly and completely, in the way that voices break when a person stops trying to manage them. I was terrified of what would happen to you if I said no, to both of us. I made a choice to protect you the only way I knew how, and I have hated myself for it every single day since. Elena sat with the phone against her ear and listened to her father cry for a moment. She had not heard him cry since her mother's funeral. It was a specific sound, private and unguarded and very old. She did not say it was okay, because it wasn't. She said, I'm not going to punish you for it, but I need you to know that I know. I know, and I'm reopening the bakery. Pause. Your mother's place, my place, Elena said quietly. Now he was quiet again. Then she would have wanted that. Elena didn't answer that. She said goodbye carefully and hung up. She sat for a moment at Dara's kitchen table with the phone in her hands and the morning light coming through the window at an angle that made everything look a little more manageable than it actually was. Everyone in her life, it turned out, had made decisions on her behalf. Her father, her husband, the men and women in Adrian's organization who had watched her for 3 years and never said a word. They had all, in their various ways, decided that she could not be trusted with the truth of her own life. Anger was there. She was not going to pretend it wasn't. But underneath the anger was something that felt, strangely, like clarity. Like she had spent 3 years looking at the world through glass that had been very slightly warped, distorting everything by small degrees, and someone had just removed the glass. It was not comfortable, seeing things clearly, but it was real. And right now, real was the only thing she had any use for. The bakery was on a corner in Bridgeport, tucked between a dry cleaner and a place that sold phone accessories. Her mother had opened it 30 years ago in a space barely large enough to turn around in, and had somehow, through a combination of stubbornness and extraordinary pastry skill, built it into a neighborhood institution that ran on regulars, word of mouth, and the particular loyalty that forms around a place where people feel actually seen. Elena had grown up in the back of that bakery. She knew every sound the ovens made. She knew which burner ran hot and which walk-in shelf had the slight tilt that sent things sliding left. She knew the rhythm of early morning when the bread was proving, the particular smell of the space at 4 a.m. Before the day had started, equal parts flour and possibility. The space had been closed for 2 years. She let herself in with the key she'd kept on her ring even through the marriage, even when she'd had no reason to keep it, some instinct telling her not to give it up, and stopped in the doorway. Dusty. The surfaces needed work. One of the light fixtures had a dead bulb. The chalk menu board on the wall, behind the counter, still showed her mother's handwriting from the last day they'd operated, 2 years ago, and Elena stood looking at it for a long moment before she could move. Dara came in behind her with a box of cleaning supplies. Okay, she said, looking around. Okay, this is doable. The ovens need to be tested. The refrigeration. Elena, she turned. It's doable, Dara repeated. Stop looking at everything that needs fixing and start somewhere. Elena looked at her mother's handwriting on the chalkboard. She started somewhere. They spent the morning cleaning. It was not a metaphor, or if it was, Elena didn't have the patience for that. Right now it was just cleaning. Actual physical labor, her hands in rubber gloves, her knees on the floor scrubbing grout lines, her arms aching from dragging a mop across the front of the space. Dara worked beside her, and they talked sometimes and sometimes didn't, and neither of them felt the need to fill every silence. By noon, the front of the space was presentable. By 2 in the afternoon, the ovens had been tested and were functioning. By 4, Elena had made a list of supplies and filed for a temporary operating permit and called the 2 part-time staff her mother had used, who she happened to know were still living in the neighborhood. Both of them said yes. At 5 o'clock, she sat on the back steps of the building with a coffee that Dara had fetched from somewhere and let herself feel, for the first time, what she'd been pushing away all day. Not about Adrian. About her mother. Her mother had died 14 months ago, quickly and badly, a stroke that gave no warning. Elena had been in the middle of a dinner party at the Lincoln Park House, one of Adrian's professional events, kind where she'd learned to smile at the right moments and ask unimportant questions and exist as a decorative and non-threatening feature of Adrian's public image. She'd gotten the call and slipped out without saying anything to anyone, and Adrian had found her 20 minutes later sitting in the coat room with her phone still in her hand. He had said nothing, just sat down beside her on the floor in his $4,000 suit and stayed there for an hour. Not touching her, not talking, just present. It was the most honest thing he had ever done. Elena thought about that now, sitting on the back steps. She thought about the particular quality of that hour and what it had meant to her then, and what it meant differently now that she understood the infrastructure underneath their marriage. Still real, that hour. It had still happened. Whatever Adrian's original intentions were, that moment in the coat room had not been calculated. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away and went back inside. The first sign that Adrian's world was not finished with her arrived 2 days later. It was a man in a gray car who parked across from the bakery and stayed there for 3 hours. Elena noticed him at 10 in the morning when she was restocking the display case, and noticed him still there at 1 in the afternoon when she stepped outside to take a call. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting, looking at his phone occasionally, drinking coffee from a paper cup, but he was there with the specific quality of deliberate stillness that Elena recognized from 3 years of living inside a world where people watch things professionally. She went back inside. She called the one person she trusted to tell her the truth about what she was looking at. She called Marco. Marco Reyes was Adrian's oldest lieutenant, and the only person inside that organization who had ever spoken to Elena as though she were a full human being rather than a valuable object that required careful handling. He was also, she suspected, the only one who had ever genuinely liked her, rather than simply approved of her as an operational asset. He answered her call in 2 rings. "Mrs. Voss, I'm not Mrs. Voss anymore," Elena said. "I'm Elena. There's a gray car across the street from my mother's bakery. Gray Honda, the man inside has been there since 10. I need to know if he's yours." Marco was quiet for exactly long enough to confirm that the question required thought. "He's not mine," he said carefully. "You know who he is." Another pause. "I would need to see a description." 40-something. Heavy build. Gray jacket. Driving a gray Honda with a dent in the rear passenger panel. She had made a note of the plate, but didn't give it to him. She was not yet sure where Marco's loyalties had migrated in the last 48 hours. "Elena." Marco's voice dropped. "I need you to listen to me carefully. Not as someone who works for Adrian, as someone who has known you for 3 years and does not wish you harm." He paused. "You need to not be at that bakery tonight. You need to go somewhere that is not in your routine. There is a situation developing that involves you in a way that has nothing to do with anything you've done." "Marcus Vale," Elena said. The silence on the other end told her she'd gotten it right. "How do you know that name?" "Adrian mentioned him when I left. He said Vale was looking for leverage." She watched the gray car through the front window of the bakery. "What does he want?" "He's looking for something specific. A ledger. A record of certain financial transactions that would be very damaging to Adrian's standing with the federal investigators who have been looking at the organization for the last 2 years. Marco's voice was careful and precise. "He believes you know where it is. I don't know where any ledger is. I know that. Vale doesn't. A beat. He also believes that because of what Adrian told you about certain accounts before things changed between you, you might be able to locate it without knowing that's what you're doing." Marco stopped. "Adrian showed you something, Elena. About 2 years ago. I was in the room. He showed you something and said he wanted you to have it, in case anything happened to him." Elena thought. And then she remembered. A drive. An autumn afternoon. Adrian driving, which he rarely did himself. He usually had someone else drive, and taking her to a storage facility in Cicero, an anonymous gray building in an industrial part of the city. He'd shown her a unit, given her the key and the access code, and said, in the flat tone he used when he was trying to seem casual about something that mattered to him. If anything happens to me, if I'm not reachable and you need something, come here. She hadn't thought about it since. It had seemed at the time like one of those preparations men like Adrian made in the abstract, the kind of thing you acknowledge and then put away because thinking about it too hard meant thinking about things you weren't ready to think about. The storage unit, she said. I don't know what's in it, Marco said. I don't want to know. But Vale's people have figured out that it exists, and they're trying to find the location. A pause. He's going to come for you, Elena. Not eventually. Soon, she watched the gray car. Is Adrian aware of this? He's been trying to reach you, Marco said quietly. He has not told me what to do about it. He has not ordered anyone to bring you in or contain you. He has simply been trying to reach you. Elena thought about Adrian's number on her phone, several missed calls that she had not answered, that she was still not sure she wanted to answer. What would happen, she said carefully, if I went to the storage unit myself and took whatever's in there to the federal investigators who are looking at the organization? Marco was very quiet. Would that end it, she asked. Would it end the threat from Vale? It would end a great many things, Marco said, including Adrian's organization, including most of it. Yes. His voice was measured and without inflection, but she heard something in it. He knows you could do that, Elena. He has known it since he gave you that key. Elena looked at the ring of keys in her hand. The one she'd kept even through the marriage, the bakery key, and beside it smaller. A key she'd almost forgotten about. A storage unit key she'd worn for 2 years as an afterthought. She'd been carrying his most dangerous secret without knowing it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at the gray car across the street and the man in it who was trying to find the same thing she was now holding in her hand, and she understood with cold clarity that the life she'd thought she was building over the last 2 days, the clean, simple, honest life of her mother's bakery, and her own labor, and no more secrets, was not going to be available to her yet. Something had to happen first. Marco, she said, I need you to not tell Adrian that I called. Elena? Not yet. I need a day. She took a breath. Can you give me 1 day? The silence stretched. 1 day, Marco said. Then he hung up. Elena put the phone in her pocket. She went to the back and told her 2 employees she was closing early because of a maintenance issue. They didn't question it. She locked up the bakery and walked out the back. The gray car was still in front when she left from the alley. She walked 6 blocks before she got a cab, and she gave the driver an address on the north side of the city that was nowhere near where she was going. And she watched the street behind them, through the rear window as they drove, learning in real time what it felt like to become, completely against her will, someone who had to think this way. She was not afraid. She was something colder and more focused than afraid. She was deciding. And somewhere in the city behind her, in an office or a car or a room she'd never been in, Adrian Voss was watching his phone not ring. He knew, she thought. He had known from the moment he gave her that key that she would eventually be in exactly this position. He had spent years building a world around her to keep her from it. And he had given her the only tool that could dismantle it anyway. She held the key tightly in her coat pocket the rest of the ride. Storage facility in Cicero was exactly as she remembered it. Gray. Featureless. The kind of building designed to be forgotten, no signage beyond the facility number. No landscaping. Nothing that would make anyone look twice from the street. It sat between a welding supply company and a lot where semi-trucks parked overnight. And on a Tuesday afternoon in October, it was nearly empty of people. One attendant in a booth at the gate, a heavy-set man in his 50s who looked at Elena's access code without expression and waved her through. Security cameras at the corners of the building, angled to cover the drive lanes between the units. Counted 4 on the way in. Adrian had chosen well. He always chose well. That was the thing that kept catching her, the evidence of how much thought had gone into every piece of his world, including the pieces she was only now discovering. She found the unit without difficulty. Row G, Unit 14. A standard roll-up door, with a combination padlock above the handle, and a second lock, a keyed deadbolt, below it. She used the code first, then the key. The padlock opened. The deadbolt turned. She lifted the door. The unit was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined boxes, files, the physical infrastructure of a criminal organization, ledgers in literal form, stacked paper, the kind of documentary evidence that federal prosecutors put on courtroom tables in organized rows. What she found instead was a climate-controlled space, roughly the size of a large closet, containing a single metal shelving unit a small fireproof safe bolted to the floor, and on the shelf, 3 things: a laptop in a hard case, an external drive, and an envelope with her name on it. Her name, in Adrian's handwriting. She stood in the doorway for a moment without touching anything. The afternoon light cut in behind her, illuminating a thin layer of dust on the floor that showed no footprints other than hers. No one had been here recently. No one other than Adrian had been here, maybe ever. She picked up the envelope first. Inside was a single folded page and a USB drive taped to the inner flap. The page said, in Adrian's handwriting, which was smaller and more careful than she would have expected from a man his size, precise and slightly left-leaning, the handwriting of someone who had taught himself to write slowly when he was young. If you're reading this, then I'm either dead or you've left me, and I think we both know which is more likely. The drive contains copies of records that I've been keeping for 2 years, financial records, communications, transaction logs. Complete everything. If these go to the right people, they will be very interested. I'm not asking you to use them. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm leaving them here because you are the only person I trust to decide what they deserve. The laptop has everything you need to understand what you're looking at if you want to understand it. The safe code is your mother's birthday. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and stood very still in the small, climate-controlled space for almost a full minute. He had built her an exit. Not for himself, the records would destroy him along with everything else. He had built her the means to end his organization if she chose to, and he had left the choice entirely in her hands. And he had done it before she ever discovered what he'd done, before they ever fought, before she left. 2 years ago. He'd brought her here 2 years ago. She didn't know what to do with that either. She was accumulating things she didn't know what to do with, and she suspected she was going to have to find somewhere to put them eventually. But that was not today's problem. Today's problem was the man in the gray Honda. She took the envelope, the USB drive, and the external drive. She left the laptop. It was too large to carry casually, and she didn't want to be seen leaving with obvious equipment if anyone was watching the facility. She locked the unit behind her, both locks, and walked back to the gate at a pace that she hoped looked like someone who had simply retrieved something they needed. The attendant didn't look up. She walked 3 blocks east before she allowed herself to breathe fully. Then she took out her phone. She had 14 missed calls from Adrian, 2 from Marco, 1 from a number she didn't recognize, which she did not call back. She called Marco. He answered before the first ring finished. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I went to the storage unit." A short, loaded silence. "And I have what Vale is looking for." She kept walking. "I need to know how serious this is. Not from Adrian's perspective, from yours." "Vale has been building towards something for 8 months, Marco said. "He's not a patient man, but he's been patient about this. That means whatever he's planning, it's significant. He wants the ledger, because he thinks he can use it as leverage not to expose Adrian to the feds, but to take over the organization. Force a transition of power." Another pause. "He doesn't want to destroy the empire. He wants to inherit it. And if I gave everything to federal investigators directly, then there's nothing for Vale to leverage. The organization collapses on its own terms. Vale loses his play." Marco's voice was neutral. "And Adrian goes to prison." Elena kept walking. The wind off the lake was sharper out here, away from the buildings. What does Adrian know right now? About Vale's timeline? More than he's saying, probably. Less than he needs to. Marco hesitated. "Elena." He stopped. "What? He has not slept since you left. I'm not telling you this to make you feel responsible. I'm telling you because it is relevant to the kind of decisions he's making right now, and some of them concern you." Another pause. "He's not thinking clearly. And a man like Adrian, when he's not thinking clearly, becomes unpredictable in ways that are bad for everyone around him." Stopped walking. "What did he do?" "He made a move against Vale's operation last night, without telling anyone, without backup." Marco's voice was flat and careful. "He went to a meeting that Vale had arranged through an intermediary, and he went alone and he came back with 2 broken fingers and the clear message that Vale is not interested in negotiation." 2 broken fingers. Elena thought about Adrian's hands. She had never seen him injured in a way he admitted to. The unexplained, bruised knuckles she'd catalogued over 3 years suddenly recalibrated in her mind not evidence of violence he'd delivered, but evidence of violence he'd absorbed and never told her about. "He's going to get himself killed," she said. "Possibly," Marco agreed. "Which is why I need to know what you intend to do with what you found." She thought about it for exactly as long as she could afford to. Nothing yet, she said. I need 48 hours. Elena, 48 hours, Marco. That's what I'm asking. He didn't answer immediately. She heard him exhale a slow, controlled sound that she recognized as the particular exhale of a man who was calculating probabilities rather than making a decision based on any kind of feeling. 48 hours, he said. After which I cannot guarantee that events will wait for you. I understand. She paused, and Marco, don't tell him I called. Don't tell him about the unit. I have already told him nothing about your calls. Marco said, with a slight emphasis on already that suggested this was costing him something, professionally. But I want you to understand that this loyalty has a shelf life. If I believe you are in immediate danger, I will tell him. That is not something I'm willing to negotiate. Fair, Elena said. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk in Cicero with a USB drive and an external hard drive in her coat pocket, and 48 hours that she wasn't entirely sure how to use, and thought about Adrian going alone to a meeting with a dangerous man and coming back with broken fingers he presumably hadn't told anyone about except Marco, who had presumably noticed because Marco noticed everything. She thought about the note. The only person I trust to decide. She started walking toward the train station. She went back to Dara's apartment, not the bakery. She wasn't going back to the bakery, yet not until she understood the gray Honda better, and whether it had followed her to Cicero or stayed on the south side, watching an empty building. She thought it had stayed. She'd been careful. Dara was in her shop downstairs when Elena let herself in with the spare key. She sat at Dara's kitchen table and plugged the external drive into the laptop she'd borrowed from Dara 3 days ago, because her own laptop was still at Adrian's house and she had no desire to retrieve it. The drive opened without a password. She'd half expected one, but there was nothing. Just folders, organized with the same precise efficiency as Adrian's handwriting, labeled by year, by category, by the names of entities she recognized, and some she didn't. Financial transactions going back 6 years. Communications logs, not emails, something she didn't immediately recognize. An encrypted messaging format that had been printed to PDF and stored in sequence. Transfer records. Contract documents. She spent 3 hours going through it. She was not a lawyer, and she was not a forensic accountant, but she had grown up watching her father run a business, and she had spent 3 years as the wife of a man whose professional world she'd been quietly observing, and she understood more of what she was looking at than Adrian had probably anticipated. The picture it built was comprehensive and ugly, and she thought probably exactly what the federal investigators, who had been looking at the organization for 2 years, had been trying to find. But there was something else. Buried in a subfolder inside the financial records. For 4 years ago, there was a category she almost missed. It was labeled simply with initials MRE, and when she opened it, she found transaction records that didn't fit the pattern of the rest. Not criminal, not organizational, personal MRE. Martin Robert Marlowe, her father. Adrian had not just engineered her father's debt. He had also quietly and without attribution paid off the bulk of it. Not through the shell companies that had originally called the loans, through a different channel entirely, routed through a charitable foundation that had no obvious connection to Adrian's world. Her father's creditors had been paid. His most dangerous exposure had been resolved. The men who had been, in the manufactured threat scenario, the most dangerous element they had been, quietly, made to go away. Alesna sat back from the laptop. She thought about what Marco had told her earlier, about the assassination attempts her father had never known about. She looked at the dates in the folder. Payments had been made in the months immediately following her wedding, while she was still in the early, careful stage of learning how to exist in Adrian's world, and he was still in the early stage of what? What had he been doing? She needed to talk to someone who understood this better than she did. She did not want to talk to Adrian. She called the one other person who had been inside that world. She called Renata. Renata Voss was Adrian's younger sister by 4 years, and the only member of his family Elena had ever genuinely liked. Renata lived in River North, ran a legitimate consulting firm with 12 employees, and maintained a studied and deliberate distance from her brother's other professional life, not ignorance. Elena had always understood, but a negotiated separation that allowed both of them to maintain the relationship without Renata having to choose between family loyalty and her own moral limits. They had lunch together occasionally. Renata had given Elena a plant when she first moved into the Lincoln Park house, a trailing pothos that Elena had somehow kept alive for 3 years. The pathos was still in the house. Elena had left it behind. Renata answered on the fourth ring, with the careful tone of someone who had already heard something. Elena. You know I left, Elena said. Adrian called me. What did he tell you? That you'd found something and left, and that he wasn't going to try to stop you. Renata's voice was careful. He didn't explain what you'd found. I didn't ask. Did you know? Elena asked. About how it started. About what he did to arrange things. A silence that lasted exactly long enough to tell Elena that Renata had known something. Not everything, but something. I knew he had reasons for wanting things to work out a specific way, Renata said. I didn't ask for details. I told myself that wasn't my business. A pause. I know that's not good enough. It's not, Elena agreed. That's not why I'm calling. She hesitated. I need to understand something about your brother. Specifically, I need to understand what he actually wanted. Not what he did, I understand what he did. I need to know if there's any version of this that involves something other than pure calculation. Renata was quiet for a long moment. Elena heard her move the sound of a chair, a door closing, the background noise of an office receding. He was 12 when our father died, Renata said, finally, in a tone that suggested she had decided to tell the truth and was organizing it as she spoke. You know that. You probably know that our father's business was taken over by the people he'd been working with, and that they didn't do it cleanly. What you might not know is that Adrian spent the next 4 years watching my mother try to get back what was taken and failing, and eventually just folding. She folded, she gave up, and he made a decision when he was about 16 that he would never be in a position where something he cared about could be taken away from him. So he built a world where he did the taking, Elena said. He built a world where nothing could be taken, Renata corrected. That's not the same thing, even if it looks the same from the outside. She paused. He is not a good man, Elena. I am not trying to tell you he is. But when I tell you that he has cared about exactly 2 things in his life, with anything that looks like actual human feeling, I am one of them. And I think you've probably figured out that you're the other one. Caring about someone is not the same as loving them, Elena said. Caring about someone can mean controlling them. Yes, Renata said simply. He doesn't know the difference yet. Or he didn't. A pause. Has something changed? Is that why you're calling? Elena thought about the note. The storage unit. The only person I trust. Maybe, she said. She thanked Renata and ended the call. She sat for a long time. The second sign that Adrian's world was not going to leave her alone arrived the next morning at 6:47, in the form of a knock on Dara's apartment door that was not Dara's knock. Dara's knock was 4 quick raps, impatient, rhythmic. This knock was 2 heavy, deliberate sounds with a pause between them, the knock of a large person who was accustomed to doors opening immediately. Elena was already awake. She'd been awake since 5, sitting with the laptop and the files and a coffee that had gone cold. She went to the door without making noise, looked through the peephole. The man in the hallway was not the man from the gray Honda. He was younger, narrow-faced, in a dark jacket, with the specific quality of stillness that she now recognized as professional. He was looking directly at the peephole, which meant he knew she was looking. He held up a folded piece of paper toward the door. She opened it on the chain. He passed the paper through the gap without speaking. She unfolded it. It was in Adrian's handwriting. 4 words, "Please let me in." She looked at the man in the hallway. "Where is he?" "Downstairs," the man said. She closed the door, took the chain off, and opened it fully. "Tell him to come up himself." The man took out his phone, spoke 2 words into it, and stepped aside. She left the door open and went back to the kitchen table. She heard Adrian on the stairs 2 minutes later, the particular weight of him, the way he moved, quiet and deliberate, even in a stairwell at 7 in the morning. He appeared in the doorway, in a dark coat with rain on the shoulders. His right hand, she saw immediately, had 2 fingers and a splint. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her across Dara's small kitchen. Whatever he saw made something move in his face. "You look terrible," Elena said. It was true. He had not slept. That was visible. And there was a cut above his left eyebrow that had been dealt with poorly, the skin around it bruised yellow and green. "I'm aware," he said. "Sit down," he sat. She did not offer him coffee. She pushed her own cold cup toward him because it was there, and she didn't want to stand at the counter with her back to him. He looked at it and didn't drink it. "You went to Cicero," he said. "Not a question." "How do you know that?" "Because the access log on the storage unit records every code entry." He looked at her steadily. "I've been checking it twice a day since you left." Elena processed this. Of course there was an access log. Of course he'd been checking it. You could have just asked me. You weren't answering my calls? No, she looked at him. What do you want, Adrian? I want to know what you're going to do with what you found. I haven't decided. That's honest. I've been trying honesty. New for me in this relationship, apparently. He absorbed that without expression. The cut above his eyebrow looked painful, and she had a sudden, irrational urge to ask how it happened, and then a subsequent urge to tell herself that that was not information she needed. Vale has moved his timeline up, Adrian said. Whatever he was planning, it's happening in the next 72 hours. He's going to come for you directly, Marco told me. Something crossed Adrian's face. Not quite surprise, but a recalibration. You've been talking to Marco. He's been useful. He's been disloyal, Adrian said. His voice had the flat quality that she'd learned to read as something specific, not anger. Exactly. But the close cousin of it, the one that lived just below anger and was in some ways more dangerous. He's been honest with me, Elena said, which is more than I can say for most people in the last week. She met his eyes directly. Don't punish him for it. I asked him to help me, and he did under conditions he made clear to me. He told me if he believed I was in immediate danger, he would tell you. That's not disloyalty. That's Marco trying to serve two conflicting obligations as well as he can. Adrian looked at her for a moment. Then he looked away toward the window, where the morning was gray and wet. I'm not going to punish him, he said quietly. Good. I need the drive, he said. No, he looked back at her. Elena. No, she said again, it's not yours anymore. You left it for me. That was a decision you made 2 years ago, and I'm holding you to it. She kept her voice level. You said I was the only person you trusted to decide what it deserves. So I'm deciding. Just not on your schedule. His jaw tightened. She could see the conflict working through him, the man who had spent his entire adult life controlling outcomes running up against the fact that he had, of his own accord, handed the control of this particular outcome to someone else. If Vale gets to you before I can, then I'll handle Vale. You don't know what Vale is. I know he's a man who wants to take something that doesn't belong to him, Elena said. I've had some recent experience with that. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she saw them land, watched Adrian absorb the impact without moving. I'm sorry, she said. It was accurate, he said. She stopped. It was accurate, he repeated, his voice quieter now, stripped of the professional layer. You don't need to apologize for saying accurate things to me. He looked at his splinted hand. I know what I did. I've known what I did for longer than you've known. He looked up at her. I told myself for a long time that the outcome justified the method, that you were safe and cared for, and that the things I'd done to arrange that were manageable, that the harm was contained. His voice went flat again, but differently, not controlled flat, exhausted flat. I stopped believing that somewhere in the second year. Elena looked at him. What happened in the second year? You made a friend, he said, a woman in your neighborhood who ran a dog-walking business. You used to stop and talk to her on your walks. I watched you with her once. From the car. Before you saw me, and you were laughing at something she'd said, and it was, he stopped. You were completely yourself. In a way I realized I had never seen you be in the house. A beat. I understood then that the life I had arranged was not what I had thought it was. That you were managing it, not living it. He looked at his hands. I didn't know how to fix it without destroying it. Elena said nothing for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere downstairs in the shop, she could hear Dara moving around, starting her morning. It's not love, Adrian, she said finally. That's closer. But it's still not love, I know. Love would have been telling me the truth. I know that too. She studied him. The cut, the splinted fingers, the specific exhaustion of someone who had not slept in days. He looked nothing like the man who had stood across the dining table from her 6 days ago. That man had been controlled, contained, unreachable. This man looked like the storm had finally gotten inside. She should not have felt anything about that. She was acutely aware that she should not have felt anything about that. She felt something. She stood up and went to the small cabinet above the sink where Dara kept a first aid kit, because Dara regularly cut herself on the tools in her shop. She found antiseptic, a proper bandage, a piece of tape. She brought them back to the table. Don't read into this, she said, and sat across from him, and began dealing properly with the cut above his eyebrow. He sat very still, in the particular way of someone who was genuinely surprised. You need to see a doctor about those fingers. They're splinted correctly. Doctor, Adrian. All right, he said, quietly, and she felt his breath against her hand. She finished with the cut and sat back. I'm not coming back to the house. I'm not asking you to. And I'm not giving you the drive. I heard you. But I'm also not. She stopped, organized her thoughts. I'm not going to do anything with it until I understand the full picture. And I'm not going to be alone in this situation, with Vale moving toward me and you making unilateral decisions about how to handle it. She looked at him steadily. If we're going to deal with this, we deal with it together, with information moving both directions, not just one. I need to know what you know when you know it, not in the version you decide I can handle. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Agreed, he said. It was the fastest he had ever agreed to anything. She didn't trust it yet, but she noted it. There's something else, she said. Subfolder, MRE. She watched his face. You paid off my father's debts. The real debts, not the manufactured ones. You did it through a foundation with no obvious connection to you. He said nothing. I need to know why, she said. Because they were real, Adrian said. The original debt your father was carrying, before I engineered the additional pressure, that was real. His business had been failing before I accelerated it. The creditors who were actually dangerous, not the ones I manufactured, but the ones he'd accumulated on his own over years, they were a genuine problem. He paused. I resolved them. Because you felt guilty. Because I felt responsible, he said. I made a distinction between those things at the time. I'm not sure I would now. Elena absorbed this. When did you start making distinctions like that? He looked at her with something that was not quite pain and not quite hope. Something that sat precisely between the two. Probably around the time I watched you laugh with the dog walker, he said. Elena looked away. She looked at the drive on the table beside the laptop. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, breaking on terrified. She thought about Renata saying he doesn't know the difference yet. She thought about the note in the storage unit, the handwriting small and careful, the only person I trust to decide. 72 hours, she said. That's Vale's timeline, roughly. Then we have a lot to figure out in 72 hours. Adrian nodded once. He did not reach for anything. He did not try to take the drive or reposition himself toward a door, or do any of the things she'd half expected him to do. He sat with his splinted hand on the table and waited. She had never seen him wait before. Not like that. Not without an agenda beneath it. She was not going to let that mean more than it meant. But she was going to let it mean something. I need to know everything about Vale, she said. Everything you know. Start from the beginning. Adrian straightened slightly. He looked at the cold coffee she'd pushed toward him. He picked it up and drank it without comment. Then he started talking. He talked for 2 hours without stopping. And for the first time in their entire marriage, he told her everything. She listened to all of it, asking questions when she needed to, letting him finish when she didn't. The morning moved around them. The rain kept coming. Downstairs, Dara opened her shop to the sound of a bell above the door. When Adrian finished, Helena sat quietly for a moment. She thought about all of it. Then she said, "There's something you don't know." He looked at her. "The ledger isn't just in the storage unit," she said. "You put a copy there, but the other copy." She pulled the USB drive from her coat pocket. "Adrian, you mailed this to the bakery, to my mother's address. Before she died, she watched him." He looked at the drive, and for the first time in everything, she saw him look genuinely afraid. "I didn't mail that," he said. The words arrived in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Elena looked at the drive in her hand. It was in the mailbox. "I found it my second morning at the bakery, in an envelope addressed to the business. I assumed she stopped." "I did not send that," Adrian said, and his voice was absolutely flat and absolutely certain. "Elena, someone else sent it. Someone who knew the bakery's address. Someone who knew you would go there. He was already moving, already on his feet. Who knew you were going back to the bakery? Who knew before you opened it?" Thought. Her father, Marco. And whoever had been watching the gray Honda. She looked at Adrian across Dara's kitchen table and saw him arrive at the same answer, at the same moment. Marco. The one person she'd told before she'd told anyone else. The one person who'd told her to trust him. She reached for her phone. Adrian caught her wrist, not rough, not controlling. Just a single deliberate touch. "Don't call him," he said. "If he sent it, calling him tells him you know." She looked at his hand on her wrist. He released it immediately. She put the phone down. The drive sat on the table between them. "If Marco sent this," she said slowly, "then he's not working for you anymore." "No," Adrian said. "He's working for Vale." The words settled into the room. Elena thought about every conversation she'd had with Marco since she'd left. The information he'd volunteered. The way he'd steered her. The way he'd confirmed Vale's timeline, confirmed Adrian's vulnerability, confirmed the storage unit's existence without her ever explicitly mentioning it. She had walked straight into it, and she had brought Adrian here. She looked at the apartment door. "How many people know you're here?" she asked. "Two," Adrian said, "the man outside and the driver. Can you trust them?" "Yes, absolute, no hesitation." "Then we have maybe a few hours before Marco figures out this conversation happened and tells Vale where we are." She stood. "We need to move." Adrian was already on his feet. He picked up his coat. He did not tell her what to do, did not reach for the drive, did not try to take control of the next 30 seconds. He looked at her and waited, which was the second time in the same morning he'd done that, and she noticed it again. "The federal investigators," she said. "The ones looking at the organization. You know who they are?" "Yes." "Would they take a meeting?" "A real one. Both of us." Something moved through his face that she didn't have a name for. "You want to go to the FBI. I want to end this," Elena said. "All of it. On terms I can actually live with." She looked at him. "Can you do that?" He held her gaze. He said. She picked up the drive. She picked up her coat. She did not look back at the table with the cold coffee and the first aid supplies and the quiet wreckage of a conversation that had rearranged something fundamental between them. There wasn't time. They walked out of Dara's apartment into the gray October morning, and behind them, in a building across the city, a man named Marco Reyes picked up his phone and made a call that set everything that followed irrevocably into motion. They made it 4 blocks before the black SUV pulled across the intersection in front of them. Adrian saw it first. His hand went to Elena's arm, not grabbing. Just contact, a single point of pressure that said stop without saying anything, and she stopped. Behind them, she heard the sound of a second vehicle slowing. She didn't look back. She looked at Adrian's face instead, because his face would tell her more than turning around would. What she saw there was not panic. It was the specific, cold recalibration of a man who had just run the numbers and didn't like the result. "How many?" she asked quietly. "Front vehicle, 2 in front, probably 2 in back." He hadn't moved. "Behind us, 1 car, I can't tell yet." His hand stayed on her arm. "Don't run. Running tells them you're afraid." "I am afraid." "I know. Don't show it." The SUV's doors opened. 2 men got out from the front, large, deliberate, the body language of people who had done this kind of thing before and found it unremarkable. They were not carrying visible weapons, which meant the weapons were there but concealed, which somehow made it worse. The man who got out of the passenger seat was not one of them. He was smaller, older, with a gray suit that was slightly too expensive for the weather, and a face that had the worn quality of someone who had been making hard decisions for a very long time and had stopped losing sleep over them. Marcus Vale looked at Adrian the way you'd look at a bill that had come due. Then he looked at Elena. "Mrs. Voss," he said, with a pleasantness that had no warmth anywhere in it. "I was hoping we'd get to meet properly." Elena looked at him and said nothing. "I appreciate the restraint," Vale said, to her specifically, ignoring Adrian with the deliberate quality of an insult. "People say something at this point. Something unhelpful." He put his hands in his pockets. "I just need the drive. That's genuinely all I need from you. You hand it over, you go back to your bakery. This is a very short morning for everyone." "The drive is not a bargaining chip," Adrian said. His voice was professional flat. The board meeting voice, the one that gave nothing. "You don't want the drive, Marcus. You want the organization. Those are different things." "They're connected things," Vale said, still pleasantly. "The drive is my insurance. Your cooperation follows." "My cooperation," Adrian said, "is not available." Vale looked at him for a moment with something that might have been mild disappointment, if it had been attached to any actual feeling. Then he looked at Elena again. "I was told you're a sensible person," he said. "Adrian has a very high opinion of your sensibility, actually. He has kept very careful watch over you for a very long time, which I suspect you know by now." Small pause. "What he may not have told you is the full story of why." "Don't," Adrian said. His voice had shifted, not loud, but with an edge beneath it that she hadn't heard before, something that cut through the professional flatness. Vale smiled. "There it is." Elena looked between them. "What full story, Elena?" Adrian's voice, the one with the edge. "I'm asking him," she said, and she heard Adrian go quiet. She looked at Vale. "What full story?" Vale tilted his head slightly. He was enjoying this not in a cruel, theatrical way, but in the particular way of a man who had been waiting for a specific moment and found its arrival satisfying. "Your father," he said, "did not simply discover Adrian's operation accidentally. Approached. A little over 6 years ago, a federal task force made contact with your father as a potential informant. He had inadvertently accessed financial records connected to Adrian's organization through a business transaction, and the investigators saw an opportunity. He let that land. Your father agreed to cooperate. For almost 8 months, he passed information. The intersection was very quiet. The two men from the SUV had not moved. Elosa was of the drive in her coat pocket, and the cold and Adrian 3 feet to her left, and the particular quality of silence that falls when something true is being said in public for the first time. Then Adrian found out, Vale continued. And instead of eliminating the problem, which is the standard response in this industry, he did something that surprised everyone, including me. He looked at Adrian with something that was almost respect and not quite. He dismantled his most profitable operation, voluntarily, removed the evidence your father had been feeding to investigators, made your father useless as a source, and therefore safe without ever telling your father he'd done it. He paused. It cost him approximately $9 million and 3 years of work. It also created enemies inside his own organization, people who believed a man who would sacrifice profit to protect a civilian source had gone soft. Vale straightened slightly. I was one of those people. Elena stood very still. She looked at Adrian. He was not looking at Vale. He was looking at her, and his face had the quality it had gotten in Dara's kitchen, stripped of the professional layer, just the fact of him, whatever that was, beneath everything else. My father was an informant, she said. For 8 months, Vale confirmed. Then Adrian protected him, and in protecting him, Adrian created a problem for himself internally that he's been managing ever since. He looked between them. I'm not telling you this to be cruel. I'm telling you because you deserve the complete picture. Your husband has been carrying this particular secret for 6 years, and it is the reason everything else happened the way it did. He couldn't expose your father's cooperation without destroying him. He couldn't ignore it without the federal pressure continuing. He resolved it the only way he could. A pause. By making your father's information worthless. And then, by making your father's family untouchable. The last word sat in the cold air. Untouchable. Not loved. Not chosen. Not rescued. Untouchable. Elena turned to Adrian. She was never leverage, Adrian said before she could speak. He said it toward Vale, but she understood it was for her. Whatever you think you're... It was always leverage, Vale said, and the pleasantness finally dropped out of his voice. It went flat and hard. She was leverage. Because you made her leverage the moment you decided she mattered more than the operation. That is what soft costs you. That is what I've been saying for 3 years and your inner circle has refused to hear. He looked at Elena. The drive, Mrs. Voss. My name is Elena Marlowe, she said. She put her hand in her coat pocket. She felt the drive. She also felt her phone. She had sent one text message while Adrian was talking to the 2 men downstairs outside Dara's building. While he was giving instructions she hadn't paid attention to, while she was standing in the hallway, pretending to look for her keys. She had sent it to a number she'd found in the drive's communication logs the night before, a number she'd identified from the file headers, cross-referencing it against publicly available contact information for the Chicago field office of the FBI. She had sent the address of Dara's building and the words, Adrian Voss. He'll cooperate. Come now. She didn't know if it had worked. She didn't know if anyone had received it or taken it seriously, or if the number was even still active. The drive out of her pocket. Vale's hand came out of his jacket, not a weapon, just readiness, the body language of someone prepared to receive something. Elena held the drive between 2 fingers. My father was trying to do the right thing, she said, even if he did it wrong. Even if he made choices I don't agree with. She looked at Vale. You don't get to use him as a tool in this conversation. He's not part of your leverage. I'm not using him as... You mentioned him to hurt Adrian through me, Elena said. That's what you did. I understand why. But I want you to know that I see it clearly. She paused. Which means I also see that you're telling me this because you think it will make me hand you what you want. You think that finding out Adrian's entire relationship with my family was built on protecting a secret will make me angry enough at him to stop caring about what happens next. Vale studied her. Are you angry? He asked. Yes, she said. Then I'm angry at everyone in this situation, Elena said, including myself for taking this long to see it clearly. But I am not. She stopped. She heard something. A sound she wasn't expecting, from the direction of the cross street to her right. I am not giving you anything. She closed her hand around the drive. Vale's expression changed. Not much, but enough, Mrs. Marlowe, she said again. and then the black sedans came around the corner from two directions at once, moving fast, and the men from the SUV went for their weapons. And Adrian stepped directly in front of Elena in the same instant, and someone was shouting the specific words, "Federal agents." Nobody moved that she had been hoping to hear for the last 40 minutes, and Marcus Vale, to his credit, did not run. Stood very still. He put his hands up. He looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't entirely read. It wasn't rage, wasn't calculation. It was something closer to assessment, like he was filing something away for later. "Smart," he said quietly, in her direction. Just the one word. Then the agents were there, and the intersection was full of controlled noise, and Adrian's hand was at her back, and she was moving and thinking and cold all at once. The next 4 hours happened in a federal building on West Roosevelt Road, in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and chairs that were specifically designed to be uncomfortable enough to keep people alert without being unbearable. Elena had 2 cups of coffee she didn't taste, answered questions for 90 minutes with a lawyer present who had been summoned by a phone call she hadn't made. Adrian had made it. From the car, before they arrived, with the particular efficiency of a man who had been planning for this possibility while hoping he would never need it. She told them everything she knew. She gave them the drive, and the external drive, and the USB and the envelope with Adrian's note. She told them about Marco and the gray Honda, and the storage unit and Cicero and Vale's conversation in the intersection. She answered every question twice, because federal agents always asked things twice, in slightly different configurations, to see if the answer changed. It didn't. Adrian was in a different room. She could hear occasionally the low sound of voices through the wall. She did not know what he was telling them. At the end of the 90 minutes, the lead agent, a woman in her 40s named Carver, with the kind of face that gave nothing away, and the kind of eyes that missed nothing, leaned back in her chair and looked at Elena with something that might have been respect if she'd been a different kind of person. "You sent that text from a log file you found on a drive in a storage unit you accessed without authorization," Carver said. "Yes." "You identified a federal contact number from a communication log in a criminal organization's files. It was labeled with the department code. I'd seen the format before from my father's." She stopped. "From something I found." Carver looked at her steadily. "Your father's cooperation with the task force 6 years ago." Elena met her eyes. "You knew we've known for a while." Carver's voice was level. "Your father's cooperation ended when the evidence dried up. We've always believed it was Voss who dried it up, but we couldn't prove how without the internal records." She looked at the drive on the table. "We can now. Is my father in any danger from this?" "Not from us," Carver said. "He cooperated with a federal investigation. He's not a subject from Vale's people." Carver's expression shifted slightly. "We're managing that." Managing. Elena stored that word in what it didn't quite promise. "What happens now?" she asked. "Vale is in custody. His organization is—" Carver chose a word carefully. "Experiencing instability. The arrests this morning were not limited to the intersection." She paused. "Your husband is cooperating fully. He has been cooperating for approximately 2 hours, and he has not asked for a lawyer." Elena absorbed this. "He doesn't need one? He has one present. He hasn't used them." Carver looked at the table. "For what it's worth, and I understand if it's worth very little to you, the way your husband handled the original situation with your father was not a calculation he made lightly. Our analysts have been looking at the financial records from 6 years ago for the last 40 minutes, and the cost to his operation was substantial." She paused again. "He burned a significant part of what he'd built to protect a man who had been working against him." Elena looked at the table. "That's not redemption," she said. "Just so we're clear." "No," Carver agreed, "it's not. It's a man who made a terrible choice to protect someone from the consequences of a different, terrible choice that he had originally caused." She looked up. "Complicated. It doesn't make him good." "No," Carver said again, "doesn't." Elena thought about her father's voice breaking, about Adrian's handwriting on the note, about the note itself, written 2 years ago, "The only person I trust." "Can I see him?" she asked. Carver considered 5 minutes. The room they were using for Adrian was smaller. He was sitting at a table across from 2 agents who stepped out when Carver opened the door, with discretion that suggested they had been briefed on what 5 minutes meant in this context. Adrian looked up when she came in. He had the specific quality of a man who has just spent 2 hours saying true things about himself to people who were writing them down. It was different from exhaustion, different from defeat. It was something rawer. like skin after a bandage comes off. She sat across from him where the agents had been. He looked at her hands on the table. Are you all right? I'm fine. She looked at him. My father, I know. His voice was quiet. Carver told you. Vale told me first. She paused. You knew he was cooperating with federal investigators. You found out, and instead of... She stopped, reorganized. You destroyed $9 million worth of work to protect him. Adrian nodded. Why? He looked at her. The honest version of his face, the one with nothing managed on it. Because he was your father, he said. It was so simple. She had been expecting something complicated, an explanation of strategic calculation, of long-term positioning, of how eliminating her father would have caused problems he preferred to avoid. She had been bracing for the version that made it about something other than what he said, because he was your father. She sat with that for a moment. That's not an answer that makes me forgive you, she said. I know. It doesn't fix what you did before. Any of it. I know that too. But... She stopped. She was not going to say but. She was not going to reach for something that let them both off the hook of the last 6 days. I need you to understand something. What you did to arrange our marriage, I am not going to get over that quickly. I am not going to process it in a federal building in one conversation. She held his gaze. Whatever happens after this, between us or not between us, it has to be real. Not managed, not arranged, not protected, real. Yes, he said. You can't protect me from difficult things by controlling them. I understand that now. Understanding it now, she paused. Understanding it now is a starting point. It's not an arrival. Adrian nodded slowly. I know. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stood. Your lawyer, she said. Use them. These next few days are going to be complicated, and you need someone in that room who is working specifically for you. She picked up her coat from the chair back. I'm going back to the bakery. He didn't ask her not to go. He didn't ask when he would hear from her. He looked at her with the face that had nothing managed on it and said, the lease. On the bakery. It's been I know, she said. I'm paying it myself from now on. He nodded. She left. The bakery was cold when she unlocked it, just after 2 in the afternoon. She stood in the doorway for a moment and breathed in the smell of the space-old flour, residual warmth from the oven she'd tested 2 days ago. The faint cedar of her mother's old cleaning products still in the cabinet under them. She went in. She locked the door behind her. She stood behind the counter and put both hands flat on the surface, feeling the worn wood under her palms, the specific texture of a surface that had been worked on for 30 years. Her mother's hands had been on this wood. Her own hands, as a child, as a teenager, through summers home from school, and 1 or 2 desperate adult weekends when she'd needed somewhere that felt like itself. The chalkboard behind her still had her mother's handwriting on it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she found the chalk in the drawer where it had always been kept, and she reached up and very carefully, in the space beside her mother's last words, she wrote her own. Not a menu item, not a special, just a word. Open. She stood back and looked at it. Then she went to the back and started checking inventory, and the afternoon moved around her, and outside the city kept going the way cities do, indifferent and enormous, and full of people carrying their own weights. Her phone rang at 4:15. She looked at the screen. Father. She answered it. Elena. His voice was different from the last call. Older, somehow. More tired and more present at the same time. The voice of someone who had been sitting with something all day, and had finally made peace with setting it down. I need to tell you I'm sorry. I know, Dad. Not just for the decision about the marriage. For the cooperation with the investigation, for all of it. He paused. I made choices that I told myself were protecting you. But they were protecting me from the hardest version of trying to protect you, which was telling you the truth and letting you make your own decisions. A beat. Your mother would have told you the truth. Asina stood in the back of the bakery with the phone to her ear and thought about her mother's handwriting on the chalkboard and the key she'd kept on her ring for 2 years that had turned out to be something. Entirely different from what she'd understood it to be. She would have, Elena agreed. Are you all right? I will be. She paused. I'm at the bakery. Good. His voice settled slightly. Good. That's good. She stayed on the phone with him for 20 minutes, and they talked about mostly nothing, about the neighborhood and the weather and a book he was reading, and it was the most honest conversation they'd had in years, precisely because nothing of importance was said in it, just 2 people staying on the line with each other. When she hung up, the light in the bakery had gone late afternoon gold, slanting through the front windows at the angle That had always meant the day was getting toward closing time. She should have felt relieved. She had the drive where it needed to go. Vale was in custody. The immediate danger had resolved, or at least moved from immediate to ongoing, which was a different category. Adrian was in a federal building, doing the hardest accounting of his life. She should have felt something that resembled relief. What she felt instead was the particular weight of a person who has just watched the entire architecture of the last 3 years collapse and is standing in the rubble trying to identify what, if anything, was real. The ring was gone. The house was not hers. The marriage had been built on a manufactured crisis, and the man at the center of it had spent 2 years quietly trying to correct his own damage without ever telling her he'd caused it. What was real? The bakery was real. Her mother's handwriting on the board was real. The flour on her hands from the inventory check was real. The conversation with Dara 2 days ago, and the spare bedroom with the flat pillow, and the way Dara had made tea without asking was real. And she held this one at arm's length, examined it carefully. It refused to dress it up in anything it wasn't Adrian sitting in Dara's kitchen, with a splinted hand and a badly treated cut, drinking cold coffee without complaining, saying I know to every accurate, terrible thing she said. That had been real too. She did not know what it meant yet. She was not going to decide before she knew. She was done deciding things before she knew. She went back to the front of the bakery and stood behind the counter. She picked up the chalk. Below open, she wrote the hours. Real hours. The hours she intended to keep, starting tomorrow morning, in the place that finally belonged to her. The chalk made a small, specific sound against the board. Outside, a woman walked past with a dog. The dog looked in the window. The woman looked in the window. She read something on the board, and her face did a small thing recognition, maybe, or just the particular human response to a light being on inside, somewhere that had been dark. She didn't come in. The bakery wasn't open yet, but she slowed down. She looked. That was enough for now. Elena set the chalk down and thought about what she would make first. Tomorrow morning, when she unlocked the door and the space filled with the smell of something real being built from scratch, and she realized, standing there alone in the late afternoon light of her mother's bakery, with federal proceedings unfolding across the city and a marriage that needed to be examined honestly from the ground up, that she was not at her lowest point. She had thought that was coming. The outline had suggested a protagonist at lowest point. She had been bracing for it, but she was standing upright in her mother's bakery. She had made a decision in an intersection that had changed the trajectory of everything. She had done it herself, with a phone and a log file and 40 minutes of hoping. That was not the lowest point. That was the opposite. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Same format as the one she'd texted from the log file. She stared at it for a moment, then answered, Ms. Marlowe. Agent Carver's voice. I wanted to let you know that Marco Reyes was taken into custody 40 minutes ago at O'Hare Airport. He had a one-way ticket. Elena exhaled slowly. Thank you, she said. There's something else. Carver's voice was careful, in a way that made Elena's grip on the phone tighten slightly. We've been going through the records from the drive. Complete records. A pause. Ms. Marlowe, the ledger you found in the storage unit, the copy you retrieved there, is a second layer to it that we don't believe your husband knew was there. Elena waited. Someone has been adding to it, Carver said. Adding to it and sourcing it from inside the organization for the last 8 months. The entries are not in your husband's record-keeping format. They're more detailed, more specific. They include operational information that Voss himself may not have had access to. Another pause. We're trying to identify the source. Elena stood very still. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Carver said carefully, that someone else inside Adrian Voss's organization has been building a case against him. Closer. The agent's voice was measured and exact. Someone who knew about the storage unit, knew about you, and knew that you would eventually find the drive. The bakery was very quiet. Elena looked at the chalkboard. Her mother's handwriting. Her own below it. She thought about the envelope addressed to the business, mailed to the bakery. The address that only certain people knew. She thought about Renata, consulting firm, 12 employees. A studied and deliberate distance from her brother's world. And the way Renata had answered, on the 4th ring, already knowing Elena had left, before Elena had said a word. Because Adrian had called her, or because someone else had. Agent Carver, Elena said slowly, I need to tell you something. And in a federal conference room across the city, Adrian Voss sat with his lawyer and the two agents, and the weight of everything he had dismantled and built and lost, and his phone, the one they'd let him keep, showed a single text from a number he didn't recognize. Figured it out. 3 words. He read them twice. He looked at his lawyer. Then he looked at the two agents across the table. "There's something else," he said, and his voice had the particular quality of a man who has just understood that the accounting is not finished, that there is another layer beneath the one he thought was the bottom, and that the person he has spent years trying to protect is standing alone in a bakery on the south side, holding a piece of information that is about to change everything. Elena was still on the phone with Carver when the bakery's back door opened. She had locked the front. She had not locked the back, because she had gone to the back to check inventory, and she had been alone, and it had not occurred to her that alone was a condition that required defending yet. The morning's events had resolved enough of the immediate threat that she had stopped moving like someone being hunted. That was the mistake. The door opened and Renata Voss walked in. She was dressed practically dark coat, flat shoes, her hair pulled back. She looked nothing like a woman who had just done something catastrophic. She looked like someone who had come to help with something specific and was ready to work. Elena lowered the phone. "Carver," she said quietly, not looking away from Renata. "She's here." Carver's voice, sharp and immediate. "Stay on the line." Do not. Elena put the phone in her coat pocket without ending the call. She looked at Renata. Renata looked back at her. "You already know," Renata said. "It wasn't a question. I figured it out about 4 minutes ago." Elena kept the counter between them. The envelope addressed to the bakery. "You were the only person who knew I was going back here before I opened it. Adrian told you when he called to tell you I'd left." She paused. "And you knew the storage unit existed because Adrian told you about it, didn't he? Years ago. Because you're his sister and he trusted you with things he didn't trust anyone else with." Renata stood just inside the back door. She hadn't moved toward Elena, hadn't reached for anything. She was completely still, and the stillness was different from Adrian's stillness. Adrian's was controlled, contained. Renata's was the stillness of someone who had arrived at a decision point and was waiting to see which direction it fell. "I need to understand something," Elena said, "before anyone else gets here. I need to understand what you were actually doing." Renata looked at her for a long moment. "I've been documenting his operation for 18 months, she said. "Everything I could access without him knowing. Financial records, communications, operational logs. I built a complete picture." Her voice was even factual. The tone of a woman presenting a business case. "I added my documentation to the ledger in the storage unit because I knew it would eventually go to investigators, and I wanted it to be complete. Not just Adrian's sanitized version of accountability, the real version. You were building a case against your own brother." "I was building a case against an organization that has hurt people," Renata said. "Adrian is part of that organization." "Yes." Elena studied her. "And the envelope you mailed to the bakery. I needed you to find the drive before Vale's people found the unit. I knew you'd taken the key. Adrian told me about the storage unit visit 2 years ago. I knew he'd given you the code. I knew if something pushed you toward it, you'd use it." She paused. "The text you sent this morning to the FBI contact number. I've been hoping you'd find that number in the logs for a week. I flagged it in the file format to make it slightly easier to identify." Elena absorbed this. "You used me," she said. "Yes," Renata said. "I did. Because you were the person best positioned to do what needed to be done. And you had both the motivation and the access." And she stopped. Something moved through her face. "And because I believe you are the only person Adrian will not fight when fighting would be the wrong thing to do." Elena looked at her. "You were trying to protect him," Elena said slowly, "while building a case against him." "I was trying to make sure that when it ended in a way where he survives it," Renata said. "Vale would have taken the organization by force, and Adrian would be dead within 6 months. The federal case a real one, with complete evidence, with his cooperation that ends differently. He goes to prison for a while. He comes out. He has something left." Her voice tightened fractionally. "I've been watching him build toward his own destruction for 3 years, and I could not." She stopped. "I needed it to end before it ended badly." "So you engineered the ending," Elena said. "I provided conditions," Renata said. "You made the actual decisions." They looked at each other across the small back room of the bakery. The light was going out of the afternoon, and the fluorescents overhead hummed their particular hum. And outside, Elena could hear a car slowing on the street. 2 cars, people," Elena said. Renata nodded. She had known they were coming. She had walked in here knowing they were coming. She had walked in here because she had wanted to tell Elena the truth herself, without it being delivered by a federal agent in a conference room. Elena looked at her for one more second. "The phone is still open," she said. "They heard everything." "I know," Renata said. The back door opened again before Elena could respond, and this time it was not one person. It was Agent Carver and two others, and the moment collapsed into the specific organized noise of law enforcement arriving with purpose, and Renata did not resist, did not argue, simply turned to the agent, who reached her first, with the quiet cooperation of a woman who had planned for this exact moment for a very long time. Elena stood behind the counter. She stood there while they worked around her, while the small back room it smelled only of flour, and her mother's cleaning products filled with the particular atmosphere of official proceedings, and she felt the afternoon land on her all at once, every minute of it, from Dara's kitchen to the intersection federal to the federal building, to this like something physical. Carver came to the counter. She looked at Elena with the measured expression she used for everything. "You want to tell him?" she asked. Elena thought about it. "I'll tell him," she said. They let her use a room at the federal building. Not the conference room, a smaller one. A room with a window that looked at a wall and two chairs and a table without anything on it. Adrian was brought in by an agent who left without being asked to. Adrian sat down. He looked at her face, and she watched him read it the same way. She'd watched him read things his entire marriage. The particular swift intelligence of a man who processed information about the people around him faster than most people processed basic input. "Renata," he said. Yes, his jaw moved. "Not much." He looked at the table. "How long?" 18 months, roughly. She built a complete supplemental record and added it to the ledger in the storage unit. Elena kept her voice level. She also sent the envelope to the bakery. She flagged the FBI contact in the log files for me to find. It was very quiet. "She engineered it," Elena said, "not out of malice. She told me she was trying to make sure the ending was one you survived." She paused. "She's right that it probably is." Adrian sat with that. She watched it move through him, not on his face, which had gone very still, but in the quality of the stillness itself, which had a different texture than his normal control. This was not a man containing his reaction. This was a man sitting in the ruins of the understanding that the two people he had spent the most effort protecting had each independently done things behind his back that would destroy what he'd built, and done it specifically because they believed it was the only way to keep him alive. "She could have told me," he said. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer Adrian. He looked up. "Would you have listened?" Elena asked again. "If she came to you 18 months ago and said the organization is going to get you killed, and I think you should dismantle it, would you have?" He held her gaze. He said nothing, which was the only honest answer. Elena sat back. "I'm not defending what she did. She used me. She used you. She made decisions on behalf of people who deserved to make their own." She heard herself say it and felt the echo of every conversation she'd had about Adrian doing the same thing. "But she spent 18 months building you an exit. She built it carefully. She built it so it would work." She paused. "She loves you." Adrian looked at the window that showed the wall. He looked at it for a long time. "I need to see her," he said. "You'll have to ask Carver about that." "I know." He stood up. He didn't move toward the door immediately. He stood with both hands at his sides, the splinted fingers of his right hand held slightly away from his body, and he looked at Elena with the face that had nothing managed on it. "I did something else," he said, "that I haven't told you." She waited. The man watching the bakery, the one in the gray Honda. He wasn't Vale's man. Adrian's voice was quiet. He was mine. "I had someone watch the bakery from the day you left, every day, to make sure you were all right." He paused. "Marco found out and replaced him with Vale's operative without telling me. I thought my man was there. Vale's man was there instead." Another pause. "For approximately 18 hours, I believed you had protection you didn't have." Elena looked at him. She understood what he was telling her, not just the tactical information, but the admission beneath it. He had tried, even in the chaos of her leaving, to do the thing he always did, to control the safety of her situation without telling her. And he had failed at even that, because Marco had already moved inside his blind spot. "The instinct doesn't go away because the relationship changed," she said. "No," he agreed. "You're going to have to learn to do it differently." "I know." She stood up too. "I'm going back to the bakery," she said. "I'm going to try to actually sleep tonight. And tomorrow I'm opening. And I'm going to spend the next several weeks building something that belongs to me. And somewhere in that time, Things with the investigation are going to proceed, and I'm going to let them proceed. She looked at him steadily, and at some point, when I'm ready, I'm going to want to have a real conversation about what any of this means going forward. All right, he said. Not soon, all right, and not on your terms, or mine specifically. On terms we figure out together or not at all. All right, he said. For the third time, and she believed him the third time, the same way she'd believed him the first provisionally, carefully, with both eyes open. She walked out. The federal building at 6 in the evening had a specific quality of exhaustion to it. The building itself, the fluorescent lights a little flatter, the sounds of the working day winding toward silence. She took the elevator down alone and walked through the lobby and out into the night air of Roosevelt Road. Cold, sharper than morning. The city lit up around her. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Different format from the FBI contact. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. Miss Marlowe. The voice was male, careful, accented with something she couldn't immediately place. I apologize for contacting you directly. My name is Daniel Frey. I'm a journalist. I've been covering the federal investigation into Voss's organization for 14 months. Elena stood very still. How did you get this number? She asked. That's a complicated answer that I'd rather give you in person. What I can tell you right now is that I have material you need to see, not about your husband. About Marcus Vale, a beat, specifically about what Vale intended to do once he had control of the organization, a plan that existed before the arrests this morning. Another pause. Ms. Marlowe, Vale had a list. The people he intended to manage in the transition period. Your father was on it. The cold on the sidewalk was suddenly sharper. My father's in federal protection, Elena said. Since this afternoon, yes, which is why Vale's secondary team hasn't moved yet. A pause. The secondary team, Ms. Marlowe. The one that is not in custody. Vale anticipated that the primary operation might fail. He had contingencies. The voice was careful, controlled, the voice of someone trying to communicate urgency without tipping into panic. I've been sitting on this material for 3 days because I was waiting for the right moment to approach you. The right moment was before this morning, and I missed it. I'm trying to catch it now. Elena turned around and went back into the federal building. Send me what you have, she said. Right now to this number. Whatever you have, send it. I'm going back inside. She was already through the doors, already moving toward the elevator. She had been walking toward something that felt like relief, and the ground had moved again. And now she was moving, with the city's cold still on her skin, and the knowledge that secondary teams and contingencies and lists with her father's name on them meant that the morning had not resolved anything. It had only opened the next level, something that went deeper than she'd understood. She hit the elevator button. Her phone buzzed. Files arriving. She looked at the screen documents, photographs, a location tag. The location tag was a warehouse, Riverside, south of the Loop. An address she didn't recognize. She looked at it. She should give this to Carver. She was going to give this to Carver. She pressed the elevator button again, and the doors opened, and she stepped in and pressed the button for the floor she'd just left. The doors closed. The elevator went up. Her phone showed the warehouse address, and she looked at it and thought about a secondary team with a list, and her father's name, and the particular quality of federal protection that had the word managing in it from an agent who chose her words carefully, and still said managing instead of guaranteed. The elevator opened. She walked toward the conference room, pushed the door open. Carver was there, so were 3 other agents. And Adrian, who was still in the room she'd left him in, visible through the interior window, sitting with his lawyer. She put her phone on the conference table in front of Carver. Files, the location tag, the warehouse address. Secondary team, Elena said. Vale had a secondary team. This journalist Carver was already looking at the phone. Her face changed not dramatically, not even visibly to anyone who didn't know how to read her. But Elena had spent 3 years learning to read faces that gave very little away. Carver stood up. How current is this location? She asked. To the room. To no one specifically, already moving. The tag was placed 40 minutes ago, one of the other agents said. Carver looked at Elena. Where did you get this? A journalist named Daniel Frey. He says he's been covering the investigation for 14 months. He called my personal number. I don't know how he had it. Carver was already on her radio. The room was moving around Elena in the particular way. Rooms move when decisions are being made that have velocity. She stepped back from the table, toward the wall out of the operational space. She knew how to be in this environment. Now she'd learned it this morning. The way you learn things when you have no alternative. And she pressed her back to the wall and watched Carver coordinate and thought about the warehouse and the secondary team and what secondary meant. It meant Vale had expected to fail. It meant the morning's resolution had been anticipated. It meant someone was still out there in a building by the river, waiting for a signal that Vale could no longer send, waiting and running out of instructions and becoming, in the absence of instructions, unpredictable. The door opened and Adrian was in the doorway, his lawyer behind him, drawn by the movement and noise of the room reorganizing itself. He looked at Elena. She looked back. Secondary team, she said. Warehouse by the river. Vale anticipated the arrests. She watched him process it. The specific rapid processing. He always has a secondary, Adrian said. Always. It's how he thinks primary operation for the goal, secondary for the eventuality that the primary fails. He looked at Carver. What's the address? Carver hesitated. I know that area, Adrian said. I know Vale's operational patterns better than anyone in this room. If he has a secondary team in a riverside warehouse, I know which building it is. I know the layout, and I know what he intended to do with it. His voice was absolutely level, the professional flatness back, but underneath it something that had not been there before, not control for its own sake, but control in service of something. Let me help. Carver looked at him. She looked at Elena. She looked at the phone on the table. You're a cooperating subject in an active federal investigation, she said to Adrian. Yes, which means I can use your knowledge and not your presence. My knowledge, Adrian said, includes things I cannot simply describe in a conference room, in useful time. I need to show you. His voice was hard and direct, stripped of anything extraneous. My people, the ones I brought this morning, the two who drove Elena, they know Vale's secondary protocol. I know the warehouse. I know what he planned to put there. He looked at the window that showed the wall. He had a list. I know who's on it. The room was very quiet for 3 seconds. Your father, Elena said quietly, not to the room, to Adrian. He looked at her. Your father is on it, she said. Phrase files, I saw the list. Adrian's face, the one with nothing managed on it, went through something she had no word for. Not fear. Something older and more complicated, the expression of a man who has spent decades believing he could construct a world where the people he cared about were unreachable, arriving at the moment when the construction has failed completely, and all he has left is himself, standing in a federal building with 2 broken fingers and a lawyer and the choice to move or not move. He looked at Carver. I'm going with you, he said. Not asking, Mr. Voss, I'm going. His voice had the quality of a thing that had already happened and was simply being announced. Charge me for it afterward. Whatever you need to do. But I'm going. Carver looked at him for a long second. She looked at Elena again. Elena said nothing. She did not tell Carver what to do. She did not tell Adrian to stay. She stood against the wall and she held Carver's gaze, and she let the silence speak for what it was. 2 women looking at a man who was making the first completely unmanaged decision of his adult life and recognizing it for what it was. Carver turned away. Get him a vest, she said to the room. It moved fast after that. Elena stayed in the conference room. She was not going. She had no training and no weapon, and she knew the difference between a moment that required her presence and a moment that required her to stay out of the way and let the people with the authority and the equipment do what they were equipped to do. But she did not sit down. She stood at the window, the one that looked at the wall, and she breathed steadily. And she thought about a riverside warehouse and a list and a man with a splinted hand putting on a bulletproof vest in a federal building corridor at 7 in the evening. She thought about the note. The only person I trust to decide. She thought about Renata, building her case for 18 months with the specific focus of someone who could not afford to love the outcome more than the process. She thought about her father in federal protection, reading a book he'd mentioned on the phone, sitting in whatever room they'd put him in, unaware that his name was on a list in a warehouse by the river. Her phone buzzed. Daniel Frey. Text message. There are 2 people inside who are not Vales. They went in 4 hours ago and haven't come out. I don't know who they are. Elena read it. She read it again. She looked at the door. She walked to the door and opened it and found the agent who had been stationed in the corridor and said, the journalist who sent the files, Frey, he just texted me that there are 2 unidentified people inside the warehouse who arrived separately from Vale's secondary team. I need to get this to Carver right now. The agent took out his radio. Elena stood in the corridor, with the cold of the city still somewhere in her bones, and the feeling that the ground was moving again, had been moving all day, and that the thing she had been trying to get to the stable place, the clear air, the moment after was still somewhere ahead of her, and that everything between here and there was going to require her to be more present in her own life than she had ever been trained or invited or given permission to be. The radio crackled. Carver's voice from somewhere moving. Tell her we have it. Tell her to stay put. Elena looked at the agent. The agent looked at her. You heard her, he said. I heard her, Elena agreed, and went back to the conference room and stood at the window that looked at the wall, and the city outside kept moving in the dark, enormous and indifferent and full of people who had no idea that in a building by the river, the last piece of something that had started 6 years ago, with a manufactured debt and a gallery opening, and a man who didn't know how to ask for what he wanted was about to. The radio in the corridor crackled twice and then went silent in the specific way that silence happens when something has changed on the other end and nobody has found the words for it yet. Elena stood at the window that looked at the wall and counted her own heartbeats, because it was the only thing she had control over in that moment. 1, 2, 7, 12. She got to 23 before Carver's voice came back through, clipped and moving. The background noise behind her different now wind, she thought, or the sound of a large open space. We're at the warehouse. Stand by. Stand by. 2 words that meant everything was about to matter, and there was nothing Elena could do to affect any of it. She stood by. The agent in the corridor had his back to the conference room door, his shoulder set in the particular way of someone trying to communicate calm while feeling nothing of the kind. Asena watched him from the window in the door and thought about the 2 unidentified people Frey had mentioned, the ones who had gone into the warehouse 4 hours ago and not come out, and she turned that detail over and over in her mind, the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking for the thing that makes it different from other stones. 4 hours ago. Before the arrests in the intersection, before Vale was in custody, before any of this morning's sequence of events had resolved into anything. 4 hours ago, 2 people had gone into that warehouse independently, not Vale's people. She pulled out her phone and called Frey. He answered in 1 ring. The 2 people, she said. The ones who went in separately. What did they look like? Frey was quiet for half a second, the half second of a person calibrating how much to say. A man and a woman. The woman went first, alone. The man followed about 20 minutes later. Neither of them moved like Vale's crew. Different body language entirely. Defined different. Vale's people moved like they owned the space. These 2 moved like they were trying not to be noticed in a space that didn't belong to them. Another pause. The woman was carrying something. A bag, not large. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. Age? She asked. Roughly. The woman may be 60. Possibly older. The man was younger, maybe 50. Gray at the temples. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. 60. Gray at the temples. She opened them. Frey, she said. I need you to call the agent outside this room right now. Tell him what you just told me. Directly. His name, she looked through the window. His badge says Ortega. Call Ortega. Tell him about the 2 individuals. Tell him right now. She hung up before he could respond. She pushed the conference room door open. Agent Ortega turned around. My father is in that warehouse, Elena said, and someone from Adrian's family. I think they went there themselves, before the arrests. I think they went there to try to do something before she stopped. Reorganized. Call Carver now. Ortega had his radio out before she finished the sentence. What happened in the warehouse on the south branch of the river took 11 minutes from the time federal vehicles arrived at the perimeter to the time Carver's voice came back through Ortega's radio, and those 11 minutes had a specific texture that Elena would not forget, the quality of time that moves wrong, too slow and too fast simultaneously, each second carrying the weight of an outcome she could not see. She heard it in pieces through Ortega's radio in the clipped and coded language of people who were inside something she was outside of. Voices she didn't recognize calling clear and secure, and one voice she almost recognized saying something she couldn't make out, and then a sound that was not gunfire, but was something breaking glass, she thought, or would, something structural giving way, and then a longer silence, and then Carver. We have them. All of them. Stand by for transport. All of them. Elena sat down on the floor of the corridor, back against the wall, knees up. Ortega looked down at her. He didn't say anything, which was the right thing. She breathed. She breathed until the shaking in her hands stopped, and then breathed some more. Her father arrived at the federal building 40 minutes later. wearing someone else's jacket over his own, looking the specific way people look when they have just come through something that clarified every priority they have ever held and reduced them to their actual order. He walked into the corridor where Elena was waiting and stopped when he saw her. She had stood up at some point. She wasn't sure when. They looked at each other. Martin Marlowe crossed the corridor in 4 steps and put his arms around his daughter, and Elena led him. And they stood in the corridor of a federal building at 8:30 in the evening and held on with the particular grip of people who have just understood in a new way how close things can come to going wrong. She did not ask him yet. She had questions. How had he known about the warehouse? What had he been trying to do? Who had called him? But they were not the questions that mattered in the first 30 seconds. He smelled like cold air and the specific tension sweet of a frightened person, and he was shaking slightly against her, not dramatically, just the fine tremor of a body returning from high alert. "I'm here," she said. It was all she said. "I know," he said. "I know you are." They stood there for a moment. Then she pulled back and looked at his face. He had a small cut on his chin, nothing serious, the kind of thing that happens when someone falls in the dark. She looked at it and looked at him. "Tell me later," she said. "Yes," he exhaled. "Elena, I'm so sorry." "Later," she said. "All of it later. Right now I just need to know you're not hurt." "I'm not hurt." "Okay," she exhaled too. "Okay." Renata came through a different door escorted by an agent, and Elena watched Martin register her presence with the particular surprise of a man who has just added a piece of information to a picture he thought he understood. Renata looked at Elena. She looked at Martin. She looked at the floor. "She was there too," Elena said to her father. "I'll explain everything later." He nodded once. He was too tired for questions. Elena looked at Renata. Renata looked back. There were things to say between them that were not available, yet too large for a corridor, too complicated for the immediate aftermath of a night that had not finished processing. But Elena looked at her for long enough to let Renata know she understood the difference between what Renata had done and why she'd done it, and that the understanding was a starting point, not an absolution, and not the end of the conversation. Renata looked down again. The agent took her back through the door. Elena looked at her father. "Come on," she said. "Let's sit somewhere." Adrian came back at 11. Elena knew he was back because Carver appeared in the doorway of the waiting room, where Elena and her father had been sitting for 2 hours with bad coffee and the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, and Carver looked at Elena and said, "He's asking for you. You don't have to go." Elena looked at her father. He was asleep in the chair beside her, his head tilted back, the exhaustion finally winning. She looked at the cut on his chin and the gray at his temples, and the way he looked asleep, like the version of himself from before all of it, from before 6 years ago, when a bad business decision had put him in the path of a federal task force and a criminal organization, and a chain of events that had finally, tonight, reached something like its end. She looked at Carver. "I'll go," she said. Adrian was in a room she hadn't been in before, smaller than the others, with a first aid kit on the table that had been used. She could see the open packaging and a federal agent in the corner who was studying the wall with professional dedication when Elena K. came in. Adrian was sitting in the chair the way he'd been sitting in Dara's kitchen that morning, with the careful stillness of a person managing pain that he has decided not to mention. There was a new bandage on his left forearm, above where the splinted fingers began. She looked at it. "It's minor," he said. "All right." She sat across from him. He looked at her with the open face, the unmanaged one, and she looked back at him with whatever her own face was doing, which she could not entirely control tonight. It had been a very long day for her face. "Your father," he said. "Is he all right?" "He's asleep in a waiting room down the hall. He'll be fine." "What was he doing in the warehouse?" "I haven't gotten the full story yet." She paused. "He apparently found out about Vale's secondary team from someone I don't know who yet, and instead of calling anyone, he went there himself. He's 61 years old, and he went to a riverside warehouse in the dark to do something about a list with his name on it." She heard her own voice. "He's your father-in-law in exactly one way. He makes decisions about protecting people that bypass every rational option." Adrian looked at her. "I'm not going to say it doesn't sound familiar," he said. "No," Elena agreed. "Don't." They sat in the quiet for a moment. The agent in the corner continued his study of the wall. "Two people Frey saw," Elena said. "My father and Renata? Renata called your father." Adrian's voice was level. "This afternoon. She wanted him to know about the secondary team, the list. She was trying to get him to federal protection. Instead Instead, he went to the warehouse. She followed him. She called me from outside the building. That was the text on my phone, the one that said she figured it out. He paused. She was not trying to be a hero. She was trying to make sure a 61-year-old man didn't get himself killed because she had given him information she should have given directly to Carver. Elena absorbed this. She's going to cooperate fully, Adrian said. She's already agreed. Everything she built over 18 months, every record, every document, she's giving it all over. He looked at his hands. She's not going to prison. Carver made that clear. The documentation she built is being treated as cooperation with the investigation rather than... He stopped. They want what she built. It's thorough. Something moved in his face. She's thorough. She always has been. You're not angry at her, Elena said. He looked at the window. I was, he said. For approximately 15 minutes in the car on the way to the warehouse, I was angry. Then I thought about 18 months of work in a warehouse and a 61-year-old man. She followed into the dark because she'd set something in motion and she wasn't going to let it land on someone else. He paused. She is the only person I have never been able to stay angry at for longer than 15 minutes. Elena looked at him. That's love, she said quietly. What she did. Messy and dishonest and completely wrong in its methods and absolutely love. Adrian looked back at her. Yes, he said. You should know what that looks like, Elena said. So you recognize it when you're doing it. The room was very quiet. I'm going to prison, he said. It wasn't a question, wasn't a complaint. It was a man stating a fact that he had already arrived at and made his peace with, or something approaching peace. Not for long, Carver's team has made clear that the cooperation matters enormously to what happens next. But for some time. I know, Elena said, the organization is finished. Everything connected to it. He looked at the table. The legitimate businesses, some of them survive. Properties. There's enough that nobody will go without what they need. He paused. I've arranged for the bakery lease to transfer to your name. Fully. No connection to anything I own. I was going to pay it myself. I know. This is different. This is a clean transfer, before the assets get complicated. It's yours. It will remain yours regardless of what happens next. He looked at her. I need you to have that before the proceedings make everything difficult. Elena looked at him. She thought about arguing. She thought about all the ways this still looked like what it had always looked like, Adrian arranging things, Adrian deciding what she needed, Adrian managing outcomes from a position of control. But the bakery was her mother's, and it was hers. And he was right that the next few months were going to make clean transfers of anything complicated. All right, she said. He exhaled, small, controlled, but real. I'm not going to ask you to wait, he said, while things are complicated. I don't have any right to ask that. No, she agreed. You don't. I'm not going to ask you to visit or write. Where he stopped. I'm not asking for anything, Elena. I want to be clear about that. This is not a setup for a request. He paused. He looked at his hands. I wanted you to know that whatever you decide, I understand it. Whatever version of the next few years you build, understand it. You do not owe me a place in it. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything. Not in an organized way, it was too late and too long a day for organization, but in the way thoughts arrive when the guard comes down, in fragments and textures. The dining table, the wedding ring, the storage unit and the note in his handwriting, Dara's kitchen and cold coffee, the intersection, the conference rooms and the corridors and the radio crackling twice, and her father's arms around her in a federal hallway. She thought about what Renata had said, he doesn't know the difference yet. She thought about the way he'd waited in Dara's kitchen, the second time and the first. She thought about a man going to a warehouse by a river with 2 broken fingers and a bulletproof vest he'd been handed by a federal agent, not because it was the strategically correct move, but because his father's name was on a list, and that was not something he was capable of sitting in a conference room and letting happen. I'm going back to the bakery tomorrow morning, she said. I'm opening at 7. I made the sign yesterday. He nodded. In some months, she said, carefully, when the proceedings have settled into something I can see clearly, and when I've had time to build what I'm building, and when I know the difference between missing someone and wanting them back, I'm going to think about what I want. She held his gaze. And if what I want is to go somewhere and have a real conversation with you, not arranged, just a real conversation between 2 people who have seen the worst of each other and survived it, then I'll do that. Adrian's face, the one with nothing managed on it. Okay, he said. Just the one word. But I'm not promising anything tonight, she said. I'm not capable of promising anything tonight. I'm tired and my father is asleep in a chair down the hall, and it has been the longest day of my life. I know. She stood up. She picked up her coat. She looked at him one more time from the doorway, the bandaged arm, the splinted fingers, the exhaustion that had settled into his face like weather. He looked, she thought, more like a person than he had ever looked in 3 years of her knowing him. Not less dangerous, not simpler, not resolved into something easier to hold. Just more like a person, with all the unfinished edges a person has. Get some sleep, she said. You too, he said. She walked out. She woke her father gently at 11:30 and took him to Dara's apartment in a cab because it was the only place she had that felt like solid ground. And Dara answered the door in her bathrobe with the resigned expression of someone who has accepted that her life has temporarily become a shelter for people escaping extraordinary circumstances and made peace with it. Martin Marlowe sat at Dara's kitchen table and drank tea and told them both what had happened in the warehouse, Renata's call, the list, the decision he'd made in the 45 seconds between hanging up and picking up his car keys, that he was not going to sit in an apartment, waiting, while the situation resolved itself around him. He told it plainly and without defense, acknowledging that it was not a rational decision and that he had been terrified the entire time. The door was unlocked, he said, which I should have understood meant someone had already been through it. But I didn't think clearly, I just went in. It was very dark. He looked at his tea. I found a man inside, veils. He paused. He was not in a cooperative mood. We had a very unpleasant few minutes before the federal agents arrived. The cut on your chin, Elena said, from the floor, he said, when the man expressed his lack of cooperation. Elena looked at him. Dad, she said. I know, he said. I know, Elena. It was not wise. It was exactly what you always told me not to do, she said. You told me to be smart, to think before moving, to not let urgency bypass reason. I know, he said again, quieter. And you went into a dark warehouse alone because your name was on a list. He looked at her. His eyes were tired and old, and entirely without pretense. He said, I went there because I was afraid, and because I was finished letting things happen to me without trying to affect them, and because he stopped. Because somewhere in this last week, watching you make decisions that I would not have had the courage to make, I decided I was finished being the man who needed protecting. Kitchen was very quiet. Dara looked at her tea. Elena looked at her father. She thought about a chain of people who had made decisions out of fear disguised as protection. Adrian protecting Martin by destroying evidence. Martin protecting Elena by allowing an arranged marriage. Renata protecting Adrian by building a case against him. Her father walking into a warehouse because he could not stand one more day of being the person that everyone else was quietly managing. Fear dressed up as love, as strategy, as necessity. And underneath all of it, the actual love messy and badly expressed, and costing everyone involved far more than it needed to. I'm not going to stay angry at you, Elena said to her father, but I need you to understand something. Going forward. All of us. She looked at Dara briefly, because Dara had been in this too, had been the stable center while everything spun. If you're afraid, say you're afraid. If you need help, ask for it. If you know something that I need to know, tell me. Not the version you've decided I can handle. The real version. Martin nodded. The same goes for me, she said. I'm going to try very hard to do that myself. Dara reached across the table and put her hand over Elena's briefly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The bakery opened at 7 the next morning. Elena got there at 4:30, because that was the hour the bread needed to start, and because she had not been able to sleep past 3, and the apartment was small, and her father was on the couch, and the ceiling of Dara's spare room had stopped having anything useful to tell her. She let herself in the back and turned the lights on, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the space before anyone or anything else arrived. Chalkboard, her mother's handwriting, and hers below it. Open. She went to the back and started the bread. There is a particular quality to the early morning hours in a kitchen, when work is being done seriously the way the sounds organize themselves, the oven's heat changing the smell of the room, the rhythm of hands that know what they're doing, falling into the pattern of the task. Elena worked without rushing and without the ambient noise of music or news or anything external. Just the kitchen and the bread and the work itself. By 6:30 she had bread proving, and 2 trays of pastry in the oven, and a coffee she had actually tasted, and the particular kind of tired that is not unpleasant, the tired of a body that has been used for something real. Her 2 employees arrived at 6:45. Marta and Leon, both of whom had worked for her mother and both of whom had, without saying much about it, simply shown up to help rebuild because it was the right thing, and because the bakery was the bakery, and some things you do without needing a detailed explanation. Marta looked at the chalkboard when she came in and looked at Elena and said, "Your mother would be very annoying about this." She would have told everyone she knew. Elena laughed. Surprised her, the way it had surprised her at Dara's table a week ago, and it felt the same, like a small piece of the self coming back online after a long power outage. "She would have made me call the newspaper," Elena said. "The newspaper and the radio station, and probably the alderman's office," Marta said, tying on her apron. She had a list. Leon came in from the back with a box of cups and said nothing, which was entirely typical of Leon, and began setting up the front counter with the focused efficiency of a person who has missed doing a specific thing and is very glad to be doing it again. At 7, Elena unlocked the front door. The first customer came in at 7:03, a woman in her 60s who lived 3 blocks over and had been coming to this bakery since Elena's mother opened it, who looked around the space and looked at the chalkboard and looked at Elena and said, "Oh, good. I was hoping those 3 words." Elena sold her 2 croissants and a loaf of the morning bread and said, "We're just getting started. Some things we used to carry we'll get back to. It'll take a little time." "Of course it will," the woman said, as though this were obvious and the most reasonable thing in the world. "Things take time. That's all right." She left. Elena stood behind the counter and watched her go. The weeks that followed had the particular texture of a life being rebuilt in real time, not reconstructed from a plan, but assembled day by day from whatever was available and true. The bakery opened every morning and closed every evening, and between those 2 events, a great deal of ordinary human activity took place, most of it unremarkable, all of it hers. Her father came in most mornings around 9. He sat at the small table near the window and drank coffee, and sometimes talked to the regulars, and sometimes read. He was not hiding. He was not pretending the last several weeks had not happened. He was simply present in a way he had not been in years, the particular presence of a man who has been frightened badly enough to stop saving his attention for later. He told her, one morning, about the 8 months he'd spent cooperating with the federal task force. He told it plainly, without the version he'd edited for her comfort. He'd been afraid, he said. He'd believed he was doing the right thing. He'd also believed at some point during those 8 months that he was in over his head and that the people he was working with had interests that were not entirely aligned with his. He'd been relieved, he admitted, when the evidence dried up. He had not understood, until Elena told him, that it was Adrian who had dried it up. "He saved me," Martin said, "after I'd been trying to put him away." "Yes," Elena said. Her father was quiet for a moment. "That must have cost him $9 million and 3 years of work, roughly, and enemies inside his own organization." She paused, and eventually everything else. Martin looked his coffee. "I don't know how to feel about that," he said. "Neither do I," Elena said. "That's where I am with most of it. I don't know how to feel about it. So I'm just letting it be what it is for now." He nodded. "It's very grown up of you," he said, and it was not condescension. It was genuine, the specific admiration of a parent for a child who has arrived somewhere the parent has not managed to get to. "I had good motivation," Elena said. The proceedings took the shape Carver had suggested they would. Long and complicated and full of language that required a lawyer to translate, but moving in the direction she had been told they would move. Adrian's cooperation was extensive and genuine. The organization's financial records were complete. Carver's team had, she was told by her own lawyer, more material than they'd expected and in better condition than they'd hoped. Marcus Vale was charged. His secondary team was charged. Several people inside Adrian's organization who had not cooperated were charged. Renata was not charged. Her documentation was reclassified as cooperating evidence. She returned to her consulting firm, which had apparently continued operating without her for several weeks through the combined effort of 12 loyal employees, who had been told only that she had a family situation requiring her full attention. She sent Elena a plant, a trailing pothos, very similar to the one she'd given her 3 years ago that was still, presumably, in the house on Lincoln Park. Elena put it on the counter of the bakery, where it trailed over the edge toward the display case. She sent Renata a text, "Thank you for the plant. We'll talk soon." Renata sent back, "I know, I'll wait." 4 months after the warehouse, Elena went to visit Adrian. It was not a dramatic visit. She had told herself it wouldn't be, and she held to that. She drove herself in the used car she'd bought the month before, and she went through the process of entry, which was tedious and dehumanizing in the specific way all such processes are, and she sat across from him at a table, in a room that smelled like institutional cleaning products and fluorescent light. He looked different, not worse necessarily. Smaller in some ways, not physically, but the particular way people become smaller when the apparatus around them is removed. Car, no coat, no organization, no empire. Just the man. He looked at her when she sat down and said nothing for a moment. She looked back. "You look well," he said finally. "The bakery helps," she said. "How's business?" "Good. Better than I expected. There's a woman who comes in every Tuesday and orders the same thing and tells me her grandmother used to come here. Turns out her grandmother was a regular of my mother's." She paused. "It's the kind of thing that doesn't have a name. The continuity of a small place." He nodded. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said in the federal building, that you weren't going to ask for anything." He waited. "I've decided that I'm not ready to agree with you that you shouldn't ask," she said carefully. "I don't think it serves either of us for you to make yourself smaller than the situation requires. If you want something, you can say you want it. I'll tell you honestly what I think about it." He looked at her. "All right," he said. "So is there anything you want to say to me? That you've been not saying because you decided I didn't owe you anything?" He considered this seriously, with the particular care of a man who has recently learned that saying things quickly is not the same as saying them well. "I want to tell you that I understand now what I didn't understand then," she said. "Not as an argument for anything, just as a fact." He looked at the table and then back at her. "I thought that keeping you safe was love. I thought that arranging your world so that nothing bad could reach you was what love looked like. I didn't understand that love requires the other person to be actually present in it. Can't love someone you've placed inside glass." Elena listened. "I also want to tell you," he continued, "that the year you put into that bakery, the one before I gave you the key, when we were still married and I used to watch you come back from visiting it with flour on your coat that you didn't know was there. That was the year I understood I had done something I could not fix by doubling down on it." He paused. "I didn't know how to do something different, so I gave you the key instead," which was its own kind of cowardice. It was its own kind of beginning, Elena said. He looked at her. "I'm not forgiving you today," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Forgiveness is going to take longer than 4 months, and it is going to require a lot of things I cannot yet predict." She held his gaze. "But I came here today. That means something. I'm not going to tell you it means nothing." "I know," he said. She looked at his hands on the table. The fingers had healed. No splint. She looked at the hands and looked at him. "I brought you something," she said. She had carried a small wrapped package through the entry process, which had required explanation, and she placed it on the table between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Open it," she said. He unwrapped it carefully, not rushing, with the specific attention of someone who has decided to be present in small moments the way they previously were not. Inside was a small paper bag, the kind she used for the bakery, folded and sealed with a sticker. He opened the bag. Inside were 2 honey almond pastries, slightly imperfect on one edge, with the particular amber color that meant they had been made this morning. He looked at them. He looked at her. "They're not perfect," she said. "The technique on that particular shape is something I'm still working on." "They look perfect to me," he said. "They're not," she said, "but they're real." He took one of them and held it for a moment without eating it, looking at her with the face that had nothing managed on it, the face she had seen for the first time in Dara's kitchen, that she thought she would be learning the features of for a very long time. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet and without any of the layers it usually carried. "You're welcome," she said. They sat together for the rest of the visit, the full time allowed, which was not long enough and longer than she'd expected to want, and they talked about real things. His reading, her regulars, Renata's consulting firm landing a new client, Martin's slow return to a version of himself that was quieter and more present than the previous version. Small things, true things. When the time was called, she stood up. They stood on opposite sides of the table in the room that smelled like institutional cleaning products, and she looked at him one more time. Not a promise structured for his benefit, not a kindness. "True thing. I'll be here," he said. She walked out. The drive back to the south side took 40 minutes through the afternoon traffic, and Elena drove with the windows slightly open, despite the cold. Because the cold helped her think, and she had a great deal she wanted to think about. She thought about the honey almond pastries and the imperfect edge on one side, that she was going to fix tomorrow morning. She thought about her mother's handwriting on the chalkboard. She thought about Dara's spare room with the flat pillow. She thought about her father at the table by the window, reading. She thought about a plant trailing over the edge of the display case. She thought about a man sitting in a room with a paper bag, eating something that was not perfect but real. She pulled up to the bakery just before close. Leon had already begun the evening clean. She could see him through the window, moving through the space with the focused quiet she'd come to know over the last 4 months as one of the specific textures of this place, the sound of someone who took the work seriously and understood. Taking it seriously was itself a form of care. She sat in the car for a moment. The city moved around the car, the way it always did, enormous and indifferent, full of people who had no idea about the specifics of anyone else's particular accounting. Someone walked past with a child who stopped to look in the bakery window. The child pressed their face to the glass. Elena watched them. Then she got out of the car. She walked to the front door and unlocked it, stepped inside. The smell of it, at end of day, was different from the morning smell, still flour, still warmth, but layered now with the particular richness of a full day's work. All the things that had been made and sold and given over to people who had stood at the counter and ordered something and carried it out into their lives. She stood in the doorway and breathed it in. Leon looked up. "Good day?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She took off her coat. "Take the closing." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Go home." He went home. She moved through the evening, closing the way she had learned to move through it over 4 months, not rushing, each step in its order, shutting things down carefully, and cleaning what needed to be cleaned and checking what needed to be checked. She did it in the quiet, without music, the city outside going about its business through the front windows. At the end of it, she stood behind the counter one more time and looked at the chalkboard, her mother's handwriting, hers below it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned off the lights. She walked out the front door and locked it behind her. The night air was cold and clear. No rain tonight. The street was lit in the particular way Chicago lights itself in winter pools of warmth against a great deal of dark, the buildings in the distance picking up the lake's reflection. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She was not waiting for anything. She was not bracing for what came next. She was simply standing in the night air of a city she had lived in her whole life, outside a bakery that had her mother's name in its bones and hers in its future, with a great deal of difficult and unfinished and true things behind her, and a great deal more ahead. She put her hands in her coat pockets. She started walking. The city held her the way cities hold everyone, without preference, without guarantee, without the particular care of a controlled environment designed to keep bad things from reaching her. Just the street, just the cold, just the lights. It was enough, it was, she thought, exactly enough.